Hi everyone, I am Dream Into Wealth. I know people watching this are trying to fall asleep. How are you? And I hope you are okay in life. Listen to my story and make yourself comfortable. Also, if y'all like this kind of stories, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The rain had a way of speaking truth when a man was still enough to listen. Out on the plains where the sky stretched wide and the earth rolled flat spilled whiskey, every drop felt like a tick of a clock, steady, honest, and impossible to rush. I'd learned that watching storms roll over the prairie, years before I wondered or stood numbers or markets. Back then, I just knew the rhythm of things. A seed took its time, a horse healed in silence, and a man's fortune came slow or nodded at. You couldn't hustle the soil. You could only tend it and wait. I wasn't born rich. I was born in a shack with a leaky roof, where winter crept in through the cracks and summer baked you like bread left too long. My pa was a cattle hand with hands like rope and eyes like distance. He taught to three things before he left this world too early. Never gamble what you can't afford to lose, never promise what you can't pay in sweat, and always leave a place better than you found it. I didn't know it then, but those three rules were worth more than any ledger I'd have balanced. When I was 20, I worked trail for a man named Holloway. He was rich by frontier standards, owned land and far that a crow could fly, and carried himself like the sky owed him fair weather. But for woe his wealth, there was a hunger in him that never slept. I'd see him at dusk, sitting by the fire, flipping through his little black book, numbers scratched tight like secrets. He'd mutter to himself about cattle counts, grain futures, and the next big buy. It wasn't greed exactly. It was fear of falling back to dust. I understood that kind of fear. I'd lived on the edge of it my whole life. One night, after a long drive through the Badlands, the herd bedded down and Holloway came to sit by me. Rain had just started falling, that soft, needling kind that don't chill you but don't quit neither. He said, "Boy, you ever wonder why men get rich and most just die tired?" I told him I reckoned it was luck. He laughed at that, dry and bitter. Luck a win. You can't catch it, but discipline, that a fence post. You plant enough of those, you can shape the whole damn prairie. Didn't mean much to me then, but those words stuck. I spent years watching him, how he measured every deal, how he said no more often than yes. He didn't chase opportunity, he waited for it to circle back tired, and when it did, he bought it cheap. There was wisdom in that kind of patience, but there was danger too. He spent so much time staring at ledgers he forgot to live. When he died, his son sold half his land to pay off debts he never even owed, debts of want. I realized then that a man can be rich on paper, bankrupt in peace. So I left the Holloway spread and struck out on my own with nothing but a saddlebag, a worn-out horse, and a head full of lessons I hadn't yet earned the right to teach. I worked odd jobs, fence mending, freight hauling, even panned for gold in a dry creek out Abilene. Never found much, but I found time. Time to think, time to watch how the world moved.
Hello, something. No banker wrote down everything in nature compounds. Water finds its way, roots dig deeper each year. Even failure, given patience, grows into wisdom if you don't quit tending it. That was the year I started my real education, not in books or schools, but in rhythm. The kind that tells you when to hold, when to sow, when to wait. I saved what little I had, not in a box, but in habit. Every coin I earned, I split three ways. One for living, one for saving, and one for giving. Folks laughed at that third part, said I was throwing money to the wind, but I figured generosity was just an investment in the soul, and souls, like markets, only grow when circulated. Years rolled by, the country changed, railroads came and went, gold boomed and busted, but I stayed steady.
Bought my first parcel of land with the sweat of fed winters, just 40 acres of dry brush, but it was mine. I planted mesquite and let the rain do the rest. Didn't see profit for near a decade, but when the grass came back green and strong, so did the cattle. When I learned the greatest secret from finance, growth is invisible until it isn't. Men in me lost fortunes chasing fast gains. I just kept reinvesting the small wins, patching fences, buying another acre of rear, another mule bay. It wasn't glamorous, it was slow, almost dull, but dull has a way of outlasting flashy. My wealth didn't explode, it compounded. Every day a grain, every season a layer. Before I knew it, I'd built a life steady enough to stand in the wind. But the thing they don't teach in ledgers, the richer you get, the more ghosts you meet. Not the kind that haunt houses, the kind that whisper what you could have done different. I'd catch my staring at sunsets, wondering if maybe I'd traded too much time for stability. But then the rain would start again, gentle and sure, reminding me that even peace needs tending.
That wealth ain't a finish line, it's just a well you draw from it or you let it run dry. I never became a legend, never made the papers.
But when I finally sat down to reckon what I'd built, I realized something truer than profit. Every drop of patience, every act of fairness, every risk I took slow instead of reckless had turned into something solid. I was not rich because I owned land. I was rich because I understood time. And once you understand time, you own something no thief can steal. There are point in every man's life when the world stops teaching and starts testing. Mine came the year the river dried up. The land that had carried me through 2 decades of rain and plenty turned on me near overnight. Cattle dropped like stones, crops shriveled to dust, and the air itself felt like it was sucking the marrow out of hope. That was the first time I'd have felt the weight of debt. Not the kind you owe a bank, but the kind you owe to the land, to fate, to your own pride. I'd always preached patience, but patience don't fill a belly. And when neighbors started selling off their stock for pennies just to stay afloat, I'll admit I felt the pull of panic. Every sound it makes, that kind of fear, like the hum of locusts before they strike, it crawls under your skin whispering you'll lose it. I could sold too, would have been easy, but I remembered something my pa said when the roof first leaked in our shack. If you fix something every time it breaks, you'll never learn how strong it was in the first place. So I didn't sell. I didn't even fight. I waited. I let half the herd go to keep the other half fed. Sold my horse before I sold my dignity, walked the land on foot, mending fences I didn't know I'd need, and folks thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but when the rains came back 2 years later, I was still standing, leaner maybe, but unbroken. And when the others came back to buy their land again, they found it fenced and green with my cattle grazing lazy as kings. That drought taught t'other one rule no investor ever wants to hear. You can't time the weather, but you can prepare for the season. Every dollar I'd saved, every habit I'd built, every quiet moment I'd spent learning patience, they were what kept P alive when luck turned sour. After that, I didn't measure wealth in coin anymore. I measured it in resilience. Around that time, a young man named Eli started working for me, fresh out of town, sharp pelly tack but green in a spring sprout. He came knocking one morning looking for a job, said he'd heard I paid fair and didn't cheat a man out of his hours. I liked him right away, had that mix of pride and hunger I used to carry myself. He could read a ledger faster than I could read the sky, but he didn't know what half the numbers meant. One evening, after a long day of hauling feed, he sat by the fire and said, "Mr. White, I've been studying investment books. They say you gotta diversify, chase growth, leverage your position." I smiled. You know what I see when I hear all that? What that, sir? Someone building a house in a hurry without checking the soil. He frowned, thinking on that. "And you wanted more?" Faster. I poked the fire with a stick, watching sparks fly up into the dark. "Son, I've seen faster men bury themselves under their own ambition. The land don't care how quick you think. The rain don't fall on deadlines. The richest man I met died before he spent half his fortune. You know what killed him?" Eli shook his head. "Stress. The kind you buy with borrowed time." We didn't say much after that. But I saw something change in him. He started slowing down, still worked hard, still read his books, but his eyes softened. He learned to listen to the wind before making a choice. That when I realized something else about wealth, it's contagious, but not the flashy kind. True wealth, the kind you feel, spreads it calm. You carry it right, and others pick it up just by standing near you. Years later, Al would go on to start his own ranch. Bigger than mine, more modern, but built on the same bones. When I visited him one spring, I saw his ledgers neat and balanced, his workers laughing over coffee, his wife singing by the porch. Thanked for teaching him how to read the land. I told him I hadn't taught him a thing, that he'd been quiet long enough to hear it speak for himself. That the funny thing about wealth, it don't reveal itself when you're chasing it. It shows up when you stop long enough to realize you already have it. I'd seen too many men die thinking they were poor when all they lacked was stillness. By the time I hit 60, I had more money than I'd have dreamed, though I couldn't tell you the exact number. I'd quit keeping count. My days were measured in sunsets, not profits. I'd sit out on the porch, rain tapping soft on the rail, coffee steam rising, listening to the world tick, jet firing without my interference. That when it hit me, the real compound wasn't in my accounts, it was in me. Every lesson, every loss, every season of faith stacked quiet at sediment, until what stood there was not a man trying to make it, but a man who had. I reckon most folks spend their lives trying to catch up to an image of success that keeps walking faster. I decided to stop walking, let success circle back when it's ready. It always does if you're patient enough to wait by the fire. It was near the tail end of autumn, when the leaves start turning copper, and the nights carried that quiet chill that makes a man think about all the things he used to chase. I remember sitting out on that porch, a cup of black coffee in my hand, and the sky stretching wide open, colored like old bourbon. I'd spent near 40 years tending this land, building it from dirt and hoping to something solid. Yet the older I got, the less I cared about the numbers carved in my books. Funny thing, when you're young, you think wealth the gate to freedom. When you're old, you reel of freedom. Been waiting out the gate the whole damn time. That season brought me visitors I hadn't seen in years. Eli came riding in one evening with his boy, a tall kid who looked more like the world ahead than the one behind. His boots were clean, his hands soft, but his eyes were curious, the kind of curious that gets a man rich or ruins him trying. We ate stew under a moon thick as silver, and the boy asked questions faster than a poker dealer flips cards. Mr. Keeping It Wheat, older I got, the less I cared about the numbers carved in my books. Funny thing, when you're young, you think wealth the gate to freedom. When you're old, you reel of freedom, been waiting out the gate the whole damn time. That season brought me visitors I hadn't seen in years. Eli came riding in one evening with his boy, a tall kid who looked more like the world ahead than the one behind. His boots were clean, his hands soft, but his eyes were curious, the kind of curious that gets a man rich or ruins him trying. We ate stew under a moon thick as silver, and the boy asked questions faster than a poker dealer flips cards. Mr. Wyatt, he said. Up here, he said, "Oh, you Jessica, you're letting my chair, letting the fire warm my knees." I did not say it. I started anyway, frowned at that, but what if you mess up? "Oh, I did," I said with a laugh, plenty. But Ted, the trick, you only lose when you quit learning. Failure's just the tuition you pay for experience. The question ain't whether you'll fall, son, it's whether you'll get up quiet and smarter than before.
He thought on that, brows knotted like ropes.
Eli smiled but said nothing. He didn't have to. His boy was hearing the same tune we both learned, the music of steady living. Next morning after breakfast, the kid helped mend a bit of fence that'd fallen. He worked careful, hands shaking but determined. I told him to slow down, not because he was wrong, but because speed don't last and skill does.
When we finished, I handed him an old silver coin dole from years of pocket sweat. "My pa gave me that when I earned my first dollar," I said. Told that it wasn't about what it bought, but what it reminded me of. "Don't spend it. Just carry it till you understand it." He stared at it. It was magic. Maybe it was, in its old way. See, that coin had passed through 3 generations of mistakes and miracles. It wasn't worth more than a sandwich, but it held something rarer than gold, proof that patience outlives panic. When Eli and his boy left, the house went quiet again. Rain came that even and soft as sighing. I sat by the fire, watching the flames stretch and fade. They're a kind of wealth and quiet that no man recognizes till he earned it. It ain't loud, it don't shine, yet it fills the spaces you didn't know were empty. As the years rolled on, I started thinking about what comes after a man's work is done, not in the gaze sense, but in the reckoning sense. What do you leave behind, sides land and coin? I'd seen too many fortunes vanish in the hands of sons who never learned their father's patience, so I began writing not a ledger, not a will, but a letter. Took me 5 winters to finish it. I wrote slow, like I was mending fences in the soul instead of the field. It wasn't meant for one person. It was for anyone who found it, years after I was gone. It began simple. If you're reading this, you're probably looking for answers I can't give. The only truth I have found worth keeping is that life pays interest, but only to those who wait long enough to see it compound. I wrote about time, how it ain't an enemy but an ally. I wrote about the drought, about Holloway, about Eli, about the boy with the silver coin. I wrote about my pa leaky roof and how even that misery turned out to be a blessing, teaching me early that broken things don't stay broken when you keep fixing them with heart. Then I wrote about money, though not in the way bankers do. I said money a mirror. You fill it with who you are. If you're scared, it multiplies your fear. If you're patient, it multiplies your peace. Learn to hold it without clutching. It'll lick water. It'll slip through tight fists, but stay in open hands. By the time I finished, I'd covered both sides of every page, ink faded and finger smudged. I sealed it in a tin box and buried it under the oak out back, where the rain dripped soft and steady from the leaves. Didn't mark the spot, didn't tell a soul. Figured if it was meant to be found, it'd find the right hands. Some nights I'd sit out there staring at that tree, listen to the rain drum on the tin roof. I'd think about that lead, about the generations that might come after. Maybe they'd dig it up by accident, or maybe not at all. But either way, I'd done my part. The rest was patience. That the thing about a life built slow, it don't end because the man does. It keeps compounding the people who watched you live it. The habits, the honesty, the steadiness, they ripple out long after the fire dies. So when folks ask me these days what my greatest investment was, I don't say land or cattle or coin, I say time. Because time is the only currency that pays you back in peace. Spend it well, and you'll die rich even if your pockets are empty. When you live long enough, you start seeing money for what it truly is, a language most folks never learn to speak proper. It don't talk in figures or fortunes, it speaks in rhythm. Every dollar has a pulse, and it beats in time with how honest a man worked has-beens. I'd come to understand that sitting alone in the quiet, long after the cattle had bedded down and the day chores had faded into the night, the fire would crackle low, the smell of pine smoke and wet dirt drifting in, and I'd just listen to the steady click of the world earning interest in silence. I started thinking then about all the men I'd met along the way, the ones who chased fortune like it was a wild horse they could rake with enough rope and ego. I'd seen them come and go, big smiles, big hats, bigger debts. Some struck gold, sure, but most ended the same, tired, hollow, rich in all the wrong ways. One fella, name of Clyde Barrow, not the outlaw, mind you, just a trader out of Wichita, made a fortune in cattle futures, doubled it on rail shares, then lost the lot trying to beat the clock. Found him one day in town, sitting at the bar with a ledger open in front of him and no drink left to sip. Said to me, "Wyatt, I reckon I learned the secret of finance too late." I asked him what that was. He tapped the book and said, "You can't outrun your old pace. The market don't beat you, you do." He died the next winter. Never went broke, not in the technical sense, but the kind of broke that don't show in numbers, the kind that eats from the inside. I never forgot that. A man's wealth don't end when the money gone, it ends when the peace is. After that, I stopped looking at my ledger, lit a report, and started seeing it in a reflection. Every figure had a memory behind it, a drought, a choice, a kindness, a loss. Each page told dude who I'd been more than what I had. When you look at money that way, it stops being something to count and starts being something to carry. I remember one winter where snow laid thick for weeks. Couldn't ride, couldn't haul, could barely keep the fires lit. So I passed the time writing small lessons on scrap paper, things I wish someone had told us sooner, weren't for publishing, just a way to put my thinking somewhere it could rest. Wrote things like there's no such thing as easy money, just unlearn lessons with interest due. Don't measure a day by what you made, but by what you kept. And my favorite, if your sleep ain't sound, your profits ain't real. When the thaw came, I burned most of those notes in the stove, but I kept a few, tucked them in the pages of that old ledger. Years later, I'd find them again and realize I'd written my own gospel without meaning to. The gospel of the slow dollar, I called it. Ain't got a church, ain't got no followers, but it's the truest book I wrote. Now, I ain't fool enough to say everyone ought to live the way I did. The world spins faster now, even out there. But I do think every man, banker, rancher, or beggar ought to take one slow day a month. Don't matter if you're rich or broke. Sit quiet, count your blessings the way you count your bills. They'll both tell you how honest your month been. I've done that near every month since I was 30. Never missed one. Saved me from more bad decisions than I can name. Ain't no glamour in that habit. You don't get applause for patience. But I tell you, there's a wealth in it no number can touch. I once lent a neighbor a small loan when his crop failed. Told him to pay me back when the rain remembered him. Years later, he brought a double what I'd given him. Said the interest was gratitude. I told him I didn't charge that kind. He said, "I know, that why it worth more. That man family still visits come Christmas. They bring pie and coffee and stories. That, my friend, is compound interest, the kind that don't show up in books but multiplies just the same." In my later years, I found myself wondering less about how much I'd earned and more about what kind of example I'd left. Money is strange legacy. It fades quicker than the scent of rain. But how you treat people, how you stand your ground, how you keep your word when no one looking that sticks, that wealth that don't rust. The last deal I made wasn't for land or cattle, it was for peace. Sold half the ranch to Eli Boy, the one with the silver coin. He'd grown into a fine man, sharp but steady, a tempered steel. Tried to pay me more than it was worth, but I told him, "Ain't selling dirt, son. I'm passing patience." He didn't understand right away, but he nodded, respectful. I reckon he will one day, when the rain tests him same as it tested me. I left the rest of the ranch to no one. Let the land return to itself, wild and free. Money don't need to own every inch of earth. It just needs to understand it once. Now the nights are quieter, and the fire burns lower. In my later years, I found myself wondering less about how much I'd earned and more about what kind of example I'd left. Money a strange legacy. It fades quicker than the scent of rain, but how you treat people, how you stand your ground, how you keep your word when no one looking up sticks, that wealth that don't rust. The last deal I made wasn't for land or cattle, it was for peace. Sold half the ranch to Eli Boy, the one with the silver coin. He'd grown into a fine man, sharp but steady, a tempered steel. Tried to pay me more than it was worth, but I told him, "Ain't selling dirt, son. I'm passing patience." He didn't understand right away, but he nodded, respectful. I reckon he will one day, when the rain tests him same as it tested me. I left the rest of the ranch to no one. Let the land return to itself, wild and free. Money don't need to own every inch of earth. It just needs to understand it once. Now the nights are quieter and the fire burns lower. The rain still visits St. Mabel Tavern against the roof. I could read an old story back to me. I sit here listening not to count what I've gained, but to remember what I didn't lose. My peace, my pace, my patience. Those three things outlived every drought, every debt, every restless year. And when the time comes to lay down for good, I'll leave with the same words I built my life on. Simple, sure, and worth more than gold, earned slow. Give off and sleep easy. That all the advice that old man got left to give, and that all a young one truly needs. That a certain calm that settles over a man when he done chasing. Took me near a lifetime to understand that truth, and I reckon most never do. The last few years of my life weren't filled with any grand endings or reckonings. No final fortune, no gold rush, no redemption story wrapped in a bow. Just rain, quiet and patient, tapping on the same tin roof that had heard every thought I'd have had, worth remembering. Funny thing, after them decades of turning dirt into dollars, I found myself trying to turn time back into silence. See, money comes loud, but peace comes quiet. I'd had my fill of the first, and I'd been learning to make room for the second. My days had slowed to a rhythm the world don't keep anymore. Wake with the sun, tend to what left of the land, drink coffee so black it humbles a man, and think on how simple the good life really is. Not simple 'cause it easy, simple 'cause it true. A man don't need more than truth to live full. Now, I ain't much for preaching, but I'll tell you something I've learned about wealth most folks never grasp till they're near out of time. The real interest ain't in the growing, it in the giving. You can stack gold high a church steeple, but if you ain't built a soul along with it, all that shine'll fade the moment the fire goes out. I've seen men richer than God banker die, looking poorer than I have felt. But I've also seen a widow feed 10 mouths with nothing but half a loaf and a full heart, and I'd trade 100 fortunes to live the rich that woman did. One spring, a stranger came riding through. Said he was from a big outfit out east buying up land for development. Had a city accent and shoes that sink 2 inches in our mud. He offered me more money than I'd have seen in one place. Said they were building resorts, rail stops, maybe even a town. Told her I could live out my years fat and happy somewhere warm. I lit out at my field, rain still hanging on the blades like silver coins, and asked him, "Son, you have built something that didn't come with it exit day?" He blinked, confused. "Sir, ever loved a thing enough to keep it, not cash it?" He laughed polite, said I was sentimented, that city talk for fool. I told him I'd think on it, but truth is I'd already decided. Some things ain't meant to be sold. The land wasn't just dirt to me, it was memory, it was math written in seed and rain. Every fence post, every oak tree, every scar in that soil had been paid for in patience, and you can't put a price on patience, the only wealth that multiplies without spending. He left disappointed, and maybe I was a little proud of that. Pride a quiet companion when it earned honest. I reckon he'll tell his bosses the old man gone soft turned down a fortune for a view. Let him. I'd rather die poor on my porch with rain in my coffee than rich in those city high-rise where the air don't smell like earth. Later that night, I sat by the fire and wrote one last entry in my ledger, just to see a line. The account is settled. The return is peace. And I meant it. Every mistake, every drought, every gain and loss, they'd all balanced out. Wealth ain't numbers, it a state of rest. Took him most of a life to earn that rest, but I'd pay it again if I had to. That summer, Eli Boyno, a man with his own silver in his hair, came to visit again. Brought his daughter, this time smart little thing, eyes like curiosity itself. She ran circles round the porch while the rain played its steady tune, laughing, so pure. It almost hurt to hear. Her father said she'd been learning business from books, talking about stocks and growth markets. I asked her, "You know what growth rue is, sweetheart?" She said it. When something gets bigger, I smiled. Sometimes it when something stays the same longer than the world expects it to. Didn't know if she understood, but she nodded, and that was enough. You plant words if you plant trees. You don't live long enough to sit under every one, but you trust the shade will be there when it needed. As the years folded in, my circle grew smaller. Most of the men I'd known were gone, and I found myself talking more to the land than people. But that all right, the land listens better anyway. Nights got colder, bones got slower, but I never once felt poor. I had my chair, my fire, and a lifetime of patience earning its final interest. Sometimes I think about that letter I buried under the oak. Wonder if the rain had washed it away, or if the roots had wrapped it up like a promise. Maybe someday a curious soul will dig it out and read those words by their own firelight. Maybe they'll smile and think some old fool believed in time, and they'd be right. I did, still do. The day'll come soon when I don't wake to the sound of rain, when this heart steady in it bend decides the ledger closed for good. But when it does, I hope whoever finds what I've left don't measure me by what I own. I hope they see the acres of patience, the slow crops of kindness, the compounding interest of small mercies passed forward, that the only fortune that mattered. So if you're listening out there, somewhere between the fire crackle and the falling rain, remember this wealth ain't about how high your stack runs. It's about how deep your roots go. Don't rush 'em, don't force 'em. Let 'em find the water on their own. You'll know you've done right when the storm comes and you don't rake. You just bend easy waiting for the sun, and when it shines again, you'll see what I saw, that every drop of rain was never a loss. It was just depositing life in the soil for later. The first frost came early that year, and with it came a silence that reached deeper than usual. It wasn't the kind of quiet that followed sleep or the hush of snow. It was the kind that felt that the world itself was taking a long, steady breath. I'd wake before dawn, step out onto the porch, and watch my breath curl into the cold air like a ghost trying to say goodbye. The land had gone silver and still. The cattle were gone now, sold to Eli Boy before the winter, and the fences stood empty like the ribs of an old beast that done its duty. I wasn't lonely, not excited, just aware that the clock I'd wound my life around was winding down soft and slow. My hands shook, and the walk to the barn took longer each day, but I'd made peace with it. You learn after a while that time don't owe you speed or mercy. It lasts that you use it honest while you've got it. I had, mostly, and the parts I hadn't, well, I'd forgiven myself for those too. That another kind of wealth. Most men never reach peace with your own imperfection. One evening the wind brought a letter, not by post or messenger, just something the breeze decided to drop at my doorstep. A thin envelope, edges curled, no return mark. Inside was a single page, the handwriting shaky but familiar. It was from Eli. Said he was getting old himself now and that his boy had done right by the ranch. He thanked me for the lessons, said he'd passed him on the best he could. Then he wrote a line that stopped me cold. Turns out patience ain't something you teach, Wyatt. It's something you live until it starts teaching others by accident. I must have read that 100 times. It was the finest compliment I got. Better than any paycheck, better than a full harvest. I tucked it in the front of my ledger, the same one I'd carried for near 40 years. Yep, it's something you live until it starts teaching others by accident. I must have read that 100 times. It was the finest compliment I got. Better than any paycheck, better than a full harvest. I tucked it in the front of my ledger, the same one I'd carried for near 40 years. Felt right there, like it belonged, full circle. That night, the rain came hard, first real downpour of the season. I sat by the window watching the lightning paint the hills silver. There's something about a storm that makes a man reckon his life. Not in fear, but in awe. You can't own weather, you can't predict it, you just stand in it, let it wash over you, and thank it when it passes. That money truth's lesson, I reckon, you don't master it, you endure it. You guide it like a stream through a field, and if you're lucky, it waters something worth keeping. As the thunder rolled distant, I thought about all the people who'd passed through my story, the hungry, the hopeful, the greedy, the kind. Each one a reminder that no investment pays better than character. I'd seen fortunes made and lost, but a man with integrity always found his way back. A liar might win for a while, but time compounds truth just as much as it does interest. Sooner or later, every false prophet gets repossessed. I drifted in and out of sleep by the fire that night. The smell of wet cedar filled the room, and the rhythm of the rain mixed with my own heartbeat. There was no fear in me, no fight either, just gratitude thick and heavy like a blanket. I'd had my seasons, drought and flood, loss and plenty. All of it had come and gone in fair proportion. The world had given what it could, and I'd given back what I had, that all a man can ask for. When dawn came, the rain had eased to a drizzle. Steam rose off the field like breath from a sleeping giant. I stepped outside, cane in hand, and followed the old path to the oak tree. The ground was soft, the air smelled alive. I stood there a long time, looking at that tree, older than any man, stronger than any structure. Its roots ran deep, deep enough to hold up the whole hillside if it had to. I figured that was a good place to rest when the time came. Not dead, but soon. No sense in running from the inevitable when you've spent a lifetime learning to walk slow. As I stood there, a thought came easy and clear. You're the whisper carried by the breeze. Wealth ain't what you keep, they're what keeps you. I smiled at that. Seemed like the kind of truth my pa might have said if he'd lived long enough to see what patience could do. So I went back inside, poured the last of the coffee, and opened my ledger one final time. The ink had faded in places, the pages warped from years of dust and weather. I flipped to the back and wrote 3 words under Eli lead. The rain returns. That all. Didn't need to explain it. Anyone who worked the soil or built something from nothing would understand. Life a cycle of giving back what you took, of waiting for what you planted to come around again. You don't always get to see the bloom, but you can trust it'll come somewhere, someday. I reckon when my time does come, the land will remember me and not my name, not my deeds, just the rhythm of my steps, the weight of my work, the patience I poured into every furrow and fence. Maybe the rain will fall a little sweeter over that oak, and maybe someone will walk by, stop a moment, and feel that same quiet peace I earned drop by drop. And if they do, if they take a deep breath and say to themselves, this feels steady, then I'll have done right. That my legacy. Not the ranch, not the coin, not even the letter buried beneath the roots, just the feeling of steadiness left behind. The kind you can't buy or steal, the kind that grows slow like moss on stone. So my last word to whoever listening, don't rush your story. The market will rise and fall, fortunes will shift like sand, and people will tell you you're too slow for the world. Let them talk. The world's been changing since before you were born, and it'll keep changing after you're gone. But patience, true patience, don't age, it compounds eternal. And when the final rain falls on the last field, and then the ledgers are closed for good, I reckon that what'll matter most, not what we gained, but what we gave the time to grow. The winter that followed was the gentlest I'd been known, crept and slow with thin snowflakes that didn't bite. It drifted down like memories trying to find a place to rest. I'd long since stopped fighting the cold. Instead, I'd learned to move with it, keeping the fire low and steady, wearing wool that smelled faintly of the years it'd seen at a piece that I'd come when we'd run out of reasons to hurry. I'd reached that place, woke when the sun asked me to, ate when I remembered, slept when the rain did. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, watching the clouds crawl over the plains like slow herds. The world looked softer under snow. Every edge, every scar the land once carried seemed forgiven. That's the thing about snow, it don't hide what broken, it just covers it gentle, like saying rest a while, you've done enough. I spent many of those days writing small thoughts on scraps of paper again. Couldn't hold a pen and steady it I used to, but I tried anyway. Words come slower when your hands shake, but they mean more that way. I wrote about compounding, not money this time, but kindness. About how each act, no matter what small, builds on the last until the world itself owes you peace. You can't force it, can't demand it. You just give, little by little, until one day you wake up and realize life been paying you back in quiet comfort all along. One afternoon, while cleaning out the old chest, I found that silver coin I'd given to Eli boy when he was young. Must have left it fit on purpose when he bought the land. The metal was worn smooth now, the teal's near gone, but when I held it up to the light, it still caught a glimmer. I turned it over in my fingers and laughed, thinking how far that lesson had traveled. That coin had crossed generations without it leaving home. Maybe wealth ain't meant to move fast, it meant to circle back. I remember taking it outside, walking slow through the frost. The oak tree stood proud it is, bark dark and wet from melting snow. I knelt down and placed that coin in the soil right beside what I'd buried my letter years before. Guess you two can keep each other company, I said aloud. The wind didn't answer, but the branches above gave a low creak if the land was nodding. It felt right. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm I'd come to know by heart. The creak of the floorboards, the pop of the fire, the hiss of the kettle. Every sound was a friend by then. I'd learned to live so slow that even silence felt busy. I didn't talk to many folks anymore. The mail stopped coming, but I wasn't forgotten. Sometimes I'd see Eli grandkids riding up from the South Trail, bringing bread or coffee or just a hello. They'd sit on the porch, listening while I talked about the old days, how the land used to fight back, how the rain once cost more than gold. They didn't always understand, but they listened. That enough. Patience begins in the ears. One of those visits, a girl, maybe 12, asked me if I got bored living alone. I told her, "Oh, Ma, boredom just peace you ain't made friends with yet." She giggled at that, said it sounded like something out of a storybook. Maybe it is, but it's true. You live long enough, you stop needing excitement. She started looking for stillness instead. And once you find it, you've been running from it your whole life. That night, after they'd gone, I sat outside watching the stars. The clouds had cleared and the sky was so wide it made me dizzy. Every star looked like a ledger entry, old, patient light from work done long gone. Maybe that's what heaven is. Compound interest on every act of kindness you did, paying out forever in life. The thought made me smile. I didn't need to be remembered by name, just by the way the air felt easier when folks thought of me. That legacy enough. The final storm of that winter rolled in with thunder that rattled the windows. I stayed by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, listening to it like a song I'd known since birth. The rain hit the roof, steady and sure. Each drop reminded me that time don't stop. It passes the torch. The earth gives to the sky gives to the rain, and the rain gives it back. Yeah, it the same with wisdom. You don't own it. You hold it for yourself, and you let it fall where it needed. In those last few nights, I slept light but peaceful. Dreams came easy, soft ones, filled with faces I hadn't seen in years. My pa fixing that old leaky roof, Holloway cursing at ledges, Eli laughing over stew. Even the boy with the silver coin, grown and gay, still riding steady. They came back, not bad goats, but at memories cashing in their dividends. And in the space between sleep and waking, I swear I heard something, not words exact, but a voice familiar, rain made that. Maybe it was Doug's land. Maybe it was just my heart speaking back after all these years. It said, you kept it steady. That ass, I smiled, eyes closed and drifted off again. The fire burned low, the storm rolled on, and outside the oak tree stood tall against the wind, roots deep, branches swaying easy. The same as me, still he, still patient, still learning. By the time the thaw came, the world had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that don't come from emptiness, but from everything finding its rightful place.
The snow melted slow, leaving behind that smell of wet earth that tells you life's been waiting beneath the frost. I'd sit on the porch, wrapped in an old wool coat, watching the sun stretch its first long arms of spring over the hills. The land was old, tired maybe, but still alive, and so was I. Barely, maybe, but still. It's strange how a man can spend his whole life thinking about what he building, only to find peace in what he letting go of. I wasn't planting much anymore, wasn't fixing fences or counting herds. My days were slower now, spent mostly thinking, remembering, and listening. The wind carried stories if you were quiet enough to hear them. The sigh of the grass, the creak of the barn, the far-off whistle of a train running through a world that didn't need me anymore. And I was fine with that. A man's life don't have to echo loud to mean something. Sometimes it's a small, steady hum that lasts the longest. One morning, a letter arrived from town. Took you a minute to realize it was from Eli's daughter. The same little girl who'd once asked if I got lonely. Her handwriting was sharp and deliberate, like someone used to balancing ledgers but still mindful of poetry. She said her pa had passed peaceful in his sleep. She wrote that he told stories of me till the day he died. Stories of patience, of time, of earning slow and living right. Said the ranch was doing fine, her brothers had taken to it, the ducks to water, and that she'd taken a job teaching, finance in the city. I teach numbers, she wrote, but I try to teach patience too. My students don't always get it, but someday they will. I just wanted you to know your lessons didn't stop with the land. I read that letter 3 times slow, then I folded it up neat and slid it under the silver coin on my desk, the one I dug back up from under the oak that spring. I figured it earned its place back indoors now, same as me. It was strange seeing the world continue without you, but still carry your mark, like watching a ripple stretch across a pond long after you've tossed the stone. That the reward of patience, it outlives you, quiet and steady, paying dividends in the lives of others. At night I couldn't sleep. The wind was restless, whipping through the rafters like it was, trying to remind me of something. I got up, threw on my coat, and stepped outside. The stars were bright, sharp babe pins, and the moon hung low and full. I could see the frost glistening on the field, every blade of grass shimmering like glass. For a moment, I felt like I was walking through another world, a quieter, cleaner version of this one. I walked all the way out to the oak, taking my time. My knees complained, but I ignored them. Old bones can still carry a man if his purpose walks ahead of him. When I reached the tree, I rested my hand against its trunk. The bark was cool and slick with dew. I could feel the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath it, steady, patient, the same rhythm I built my life around. I whispered, "Still growing, huh?" and smiled when the wind answered with a soft creak through the branches.
That tree had outlasted every man who'd have called this land his. For a moment, I felt like I was walking through another world, a quieter, cleaner version of this one. I walked all the way out to the oak, taking my time. My knees complained, but I ignored them. Old bones can still carry a man if his purpose walks ahead of him. When I reached the tree, I rested my hand against its trunk. The bark was cool and slick with dew. I could feel the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath it, steady, patient, the same rhythm I'd built my life around. I whispered, "Still growing, huh?" and smiled when the wind answered with a soft creak through the branches. That tree had outlasted every man who'd have called this land his.
It's seen droughts, floods, winters that would break the soul, and yet that stood, strong man memory. It didn't hurry, didn't falter, it was. That wealth, too, existing without apology. I stayed there till the first light of dawn brushed the horizon. Then I turned back toward the house, slow but sure. As I walked, I thought about how every decision I'd made came down to the same thing, whether to rush or to wait. And every time I waited, I came out richer, one way or another. Maybe not in coin, but in something worth more. That the truth no one wants to hear, slow is expensive at first, but cheap in the long run. You pay with patience, but it buys peace that lasts. A few days later, Eli's daughter showed up herself. Said she'd been driving back from the city and thought she'd stop in. She looked older now, lines around her eyes, but the same calm smile her father used to wear. We talked for hours about the land, the people, the years that had gone by. She told her how hard it was teaching patience in a world that don't value speed. They think I'm old-fashioned, she said, but I tell them compounding don't work on chaos. I laughed at that, near coughed my lungs out, but she was right. You can't grow nothing in ground that's been trampled by hurry. Before she left, she said she'd like to read that lead I'd buried years ago, the one under the oak. I told her it was long gone, probably dust or roots by now. She nodded, said maybe that was better. Some lessons ain't meant to be found, she said. They're meant to be felt. Then they hugged me soft and sure and left me standing on the porch. Then the sun went down. That night the rain came a bit. Light at first, then steady, then pouring like the sky was trying to remind the world how to start over. I sat by the window watching it sheet down over the field. The oak stood like a sentinel, drinking deep. And I realized sitting there in the flicker of the fire that my story was just one droplet in the great downpour of time. Small maybe, but part of something vast and endless. So I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered to the rain, "Keep going." Is that all there was to say? Keep going, keep growing, keep giving. The world will remember you not by the noise you made, but by the quiet you left behind. And somewhere in that steady rhythm of water on wood, I heard the truth one last time, the same truth that carried me from dust to peace. Earn slow, give often, leave easy. The rain didn't quit for near 3 days, but I didn't mind. It drummed a song I'd grown to know by heart, steady, patient, full of rhythm and reason. Some folks call it loneliness when the world grows quiet like that, but they don't know the kind of company silence keeps. Every drop hitting the roof felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that the earth still breathed, still turned, still cared to keep going, even when men didn't. I sat by the stove, a cup of coffee cooling in my hand, watching the ripples on the puddles outside. The fields had turned to mirrors, and in them I saw a younger version of myself, ambitious, restless, hungry for more. That boy had chased the horizon with empty pockets and big ideas. This old man had caught up to the horizon and found peace, waiting there, sitting quiet. Funny thing about life, it don't shout its lessons, it whispers them through weather, through time, through every loss that turns out to be a kind of gain. The best wisdom never announces itself. It then settles into your bones till one day you speak it without even knowing why it came from. I reckon that what happened to me. I never planned to teach nobody. Never saw myself a man worth remembering, but sometimes living honest is enough of a sermon. On the third day, the rain broke into sunlight. The whole valley gleamed like new money. Birds were already at it again, singing like they'd been paid to fill the silence. I opened the window and let the air in, cool, clean, with that smell of damp soil that feels that forgiveness. Every season does that, in its own way, gives you another chance to breathe, to rebuild, and begin again. I'd seen near 80 of them now, and each one carried the same message. Nothing lasts, and that's what makes it worth cherishing. I walked outside, slow but steady. The mud clung to my boots, like memory pulling me back with each step. The oak tree glistened in the sun, branches dripping gold. I rested my hand against it again, same made always, and I swear I felt it humming.
not with life alone, but with time itself. Every ring inside that trunk was a year of survival, a record of endurance, a testimony to patience. You could cut it down and count the years, sure, but you'd never measure the wisdom. Some things you just gotta feel. I decided right then that I wanted to leave something behind that felt the same way, quiet, simple, alive. So I went back inside and pulled out that old ledger again. Its pages were yellow and soft on the edges, but still holding strong. I started writing, not numbers this time, but truths, not advice, not preaching, just reflections. Things the rain had told you, things the years had shown. I wrote about how every debt paid in patience earns interest in peace. How mistakes are unpaid lessons waiting for you to revisit them with clearer eyes. How generosity, like rainfall, always finds its way back to you, just not in the shape you expect. It took me 3 days to fill the last page. My hand cramped, my eyes blurred, but my heart felt light. The weight I'd been carrying all my life had finally been tallied up and settled fair. I closed the book, tied it with twine, and slid it into the same drawer where I kept Eli Lett and the silver coin. 3 symbols of my life, a lesson learned, a debt repaid, and a truth shared. That was my whole story, boiled down to 3 small things. That evening, I sat by the window as the sun dipped behind the hills. The sky went from gold to red to that deep indigo that always feels like the world exhaling. I could hear crickets starting up their choir, the creek down below talking to itself again. I thought of all the noise I used to make chasing after success, running faster, reaching higher, never satisfied. I thought of how long it took you to understand that stillness don't need stopping, it means listening. And once you learn to listen, you start to hear what money can't buy. Peace in your own company, the stars came out slow, one by one, like shy investors testing the market of the night sky. I leaned back in my chair, pulling the blanket tight around my shoulders. The fire was down to coals, the air cool and clean. I didn't feel old anymore, not really. I just felt finished, like a ledger closed proper, every light accounted for. There's a strange kind of wealth in that, knowing you don't owe the world nothing and it don't owe you neither. A balanced sheet of peace. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, dawn had come again. The light was soft, pouring through the window like honey. I stood, slow but sure, and went to pour a cup of coffee. The pot was still warm. Funny how things take care of you right up to the end. I sat by the window and watched the first birds take flight. My breath fogged the glass, then cleared. I smiled. Well, I said to no one. I reckon it time. I put on my coat, took my cane, and stepped out into the field one last time. The ground was soft, sky wide open, and the air smelled like beginnings. I walked to the oak tree, took a seat on the roots, and leaned back. My eyes wandered over the horizon, fields I'd sown, storms I'd survived, years I'd spent learning how to let go. The wind whispered through the leaves, soft as a lullaby. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't think about tomorrow or the market or the rain. I just listened. And in that stillness, I heard it clear as a bell, the voice of every season, every friend, every lesson as earned. You did it slow, and you did it right. Then the breeze carried on, the sun rose higher, and the world kept turning patient ahead. I reckon that's how it's supposed to be. One life ends, another begins, and the rhythm never breaks, just keeps on compound, quiet and eternal. When the neighbors found him 2 days later, he was sitting as he sat back against the oak, hat tilted low, a faint smile still on his lips. The morning sun had dried the dew on his coat, and the wind had scattered a few leaves over his boots, like the earth itself was tucking him in. They said he looked peaceful, and I believe it. A man who spent his life learning how to wait, don't fear the last silence, it's just another kind of patience, one that lasts forever. They buried him right there under that same oak, where the roots ran deep and the rain always fell soft. The preacher came up from town, though he didn't say much, just read a few lines about time and toil, and let the wind do the rest. The whole valley showed up, ranchers, merchants, a few strangers who'd only heard stories of the quiet man who never rushed a soul, but always had the right word when times got hard. They took off their hats and bowed their heads, not out of duty, but out of respect for the kind of wealth no one measures in coin. Eli's daughter spoke last. She stood there holding that old ledger in her hands, the one they found on his desk. She said she'd read through it the night before, sitting by lamplight till dawn. It ain't dead numbers, she said. It a map of a man's soul written in patience, page by page. Her voice cracked. Dan, but she didn't cry. He didn't leave us land or gold, she said, but he left us something rarer. He left us the way. Then they placed the ledger at the base of the tree, right at his boots had rested. And this, she whispered, belongs there. The crowd stayed a while after, nobody in a hurry to go. Some shared stories about how he once lent him money and never asked for it back, how he fixed fences that weren't his, how he could look at a man's hands and tell what kind of life he'd lived. They said he used to tell kids that the rain wasn't water, but time itself, falling just so everything gets its turn to grow. Folks laughed soft, nodded, and said that sounded about right. Then one by one they drifted off, leaving the valley quiet again, except for the steady whisper of the winds through the branches. Eli's daughter came back every spring after that. She'd bring her students sometimes, young folks who'd never known a life slower than a second-hand clock. She'd tell them about the man who taught patience not by preaching but by living it. They'd sit in a circle around the oak, listening to the leaves rustle overhead, the sound of the stream below, and the occasional far-off cry of a hawk. Some of those kids would fidget, check their watches, restless, say new calves, but after a while the stillness would get to him. You could see it in their eyes when they finally stopped resisting it. The first quiet lesson of wealth. That time ain't something to spend, it's something to share. One spring, years later, she found the silver coin again. Rain had washed it up through the soil till it gleamed faint under the roots. She smiled, brushed the dirt off, and turned it over in her palm. The design was near gone now, but the weight was the same, solid, simple, true. She thought about keeping it, but then she looked up at the sky, gay and heavy with a new rain, and she knew better. She sat back under the oak, right where the ground had offered it, and whispered, "Your turn again." Then she walked away, leaving it to the rhythm of the earth. Time kept moving, it does. The ranch changed hands, and train passed from family to family. The house got rebuilt twice, the barn once, and the fences more times than anyone could count. But that oak, she never moved. Seasons carved lines in her bark, lightning kissed her twice, and still she stood. The ledger stayed buried at her base, pages melting into the roots, words turning to whispers. Folks said that if you pressed your ear to the trunk, you could still hear the faint scratch of a pen, like the land itself was still recording the balance of give and take. The legend of the man under the oak spread far beyond the valley. Travelers would stop by just to sit a while, leaving coins, notes, or pieces of paper with words of thanks. Nobody asked for anything in return. It wasn't that tight a place. The ground had become a sort of living bank deposit in gratitude, withdraw in peace. See, every year, someone new found their way there, looking for answers money couldn't buy, and every year they left lighter, like something had been paid off in their hearts. Decades passed, and the world outside grew louder, machines, lights, voices all rushing faster than the sky could keep up with. But the valley stayed the same, slow, steady, faithful. The river carved deeper, the grass grew softer, and the rain fell with the same patient grace it always had. One evening, a young man came riding up the hill, eyes weary, pockets empty, dreams worn thin. He'd heard of the oak, of the man, of the rain that never forgot. He sat down beneath the branches, pulling his coat tight, and closed his eyes. The world was quiet there, still. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what he didn't have. He was thinking about what he'd been given, the breath in his chest, the ground beneath his boots, the time he still had left. When he opened his eyes, he smiled. "I get it now," he said softly, and maybe he did. The wind rose, rustling through the oak like laughter. The rain began again, light and sure. And somewhere deep beneath the soil, among the roots and the remnants of the old ledger, the earth went on compounding what that man had started. A wealth of patience, of kindness, of quiet, growing steady with every season. That's the way of it, I reckon. You can't own the rain, can't hoard the years, can't take your fortune what you're going. But if you live right, earn slow, give often, leave easy, the world remembers. Not in statues or ledgers or headlines, but in the hush after a storm. When the land smells clean and the heart feels light, that's what true wealth lives. But the rain, it always cuts back. The years turned into decades, and still that valley never lost its hush. Roads stretched further, machines hummed louder, and towns filled the night with electric glow. But the old land stayed paid it was, patient and unmoved. Time had tried to modernize it, same as everything else, but the places are too rooted in memory to change. The oak had grown broader now, its trunk thick as a wagon, branches reaching wide enough to shade half the hill. Beneath it, The earth had risen soft and uneven, as if it still breathed the name of the man buried there. The rain knew where to fall, gentle rain always, and every drop carried a kind of reverence, like it understood who it was falling for. By then the old ranch house was gone. The new owners, city folks mostly, had built something modern where the porch used to be. But they'd left the tree untouched, couldn't bring themselves to move it. There was something about that oak, they said. A feeling, like the air was heavier beneath it, not with sorrow, but with purpose. One of them said it was the quietest place he'd stood. Another swore he could hear a heartbeat when the wind picked up. They started calling it the rain ledger tree, though none of them knew the story whole. Just bits and pieces passed down through neighbors, old ledgers, and the kind of whispers that don't die easy. Every spring the valley would still flood gentle. The river would swell, the grass would gleam, and the sky would hang low with clouds that looked ready to cry. And every time the rain came, the people nearby said the air felt different, like it had a kind of patience in it. You'd see farmers slow their work, folks linger longer under porches, and travelers pull their hats low and listen. It wasn't superstition, it was memory, still working its slow kind of magic. One year, a rider came from the city, a young woman with too much noise in her mind and not enough quiet in her heart. She'd heard of the oak from a teacher who'd once been a student of Eli's daughter. Said there was a tree where patience lived, and that if you sat there long enough, you could hear time explain itself. So she came, raincoat, notebook, and on. Took her near half a day to hike up the hill, and by the time she reached it, the clouds were rolling and heavy and gay. She sat beneath the oak, wiped her glasses, and did listen. For a long time, nothing happened. The rain started, soft at first, then sure. She pulled her coat tighter, but she didn't move. Then, slowly, a kind of calm started to settle over her. The same kind that comes before understanding. Out loud or grand, doth know. After a while, she took out her notebook and wrote a single line. The rain keeps accounts more faithfully than any man. Then she closed the book, left it under the tree, and walked away. When someone found it months later, the pages were swollen from weather, the ink bled into blue rivers, but that line, that one line, was still clear, as if the land itself had decided it needed to stay. Years kept turning. The legend deepened. The valley became a quiet kind of pilgrimage for those looking to start over, or slow down, or learn the art of waiting. Some came with questions about wealth, others about loss. They'd sit under that oak till the answers found him, and in time they always did, not in the words they wanted, but in the silence they needed. One old fella, a banker from Houston, came one summer after losing near everything in a market crash. He'd made his fortune quick, like most do, but it vanished quicker. His hand shook when he arrived, nervous, twitchy, like a man who'd lived too long on numbers that never stopped moving. He sat there for 3 days, no food, no talking, staring at the horizon. On the 4th day, he stood, brushed off his coat, and said to nobody, "I think I understand now. It was never the money, it was the speed." Then he walked down the hill, slow, head bowed but lighter. Folks say he went home, sold what he had left, and spent the rest of his days teaching kids how to read and plant trees. Maybe he was trying to give back every the patience he'd borrowed. They say time is a straight line, but I don't believe that anymore. Not after all this. It circles back, quiet and sure, like rain finding its river again. That old cowboy, he's still there in the hush before thunder, and the smell of wet earth after the storm. Not like a ghost, but like a rhythm. The same one that kept him going through droughts and winters and long, lonely nights. Every drop that hits the soil is a bit of him, I think. Every coin someone tosses near the roots rings a little of his laughter. And every time the wind bends those branches low, the world remembers the slow way of living the right way. Sometimes travelers did camp out by the oak overnight, listening to the rain hit their tents like soft applause. They say the sound changes near dawn, gets slower, deeper, more certain, like the rain itself is reciting a prayer. Earn slow, give often, leave easy. And when the morning light breaks through the mist, the valley shines the way only honest things do. Not bright, but true. Just the right kind of quiet for a man or a woman to remember what really matters. There's no plaque there, no monument, no name, just a sealed stone under the oak with words carved shallow but clear. He waited well that maybe that all the world needs to know. 'Cause if a man learns to wait with grace, to build without rushing, and to give without expecting, then he already richer than most kings. The rest is just noise, and the rain will wash that away soon enough. Years rolled on a quiet river after a long storm, and though the world beyond the valley changed faster than anyone could reckon, the hill with the oak stayed steady, untouched, unbothered, unbent by the rush of new things. Planes flew overhead now, hemming at distant bees. Cars rumbled far off on the new highway, their lights streaking across the horizon come nightfall. But none of that reached the soil under that old oak. There, the wind still carried only three sounds: rain, roots, and remembrance. Eli's daughter passed on in her sleep 8 years later. Her students, grown now and scattered across the Kun, came back to that valley to pay their respects. None of them would quite say why. They hadn't been called, not by letter or word, but something in them just knew, the kind of knowing that don't ask questions. They lived under the oak, same as before, same as always. Some had gay hair now, others bought their own children. The youngest among them didn't even know the whole story, just that this was where time slowed down enough to remember itself. One of them, a teacher himself now, brought an old tin box. The inside was a stack of handwritten notes, essays his students had written about patience, about money, about purpose. He placed the box at the foot of the tree, said softly, "You taught her, she taught us, and now we teach them." The wind caught his words, carried him through the leaves like a secret being shared. That's how legacies travel, I reckon. Not through monuments or names carved in marble, but through quiet hands passing down the habit of care. By then, the oak had grown into something more than just a tree. It was a landmark, a symbol, maybe even a kind of prayer. The locals built a small wooden bench nearby. Nothing fancy, just planks and nails, sturdy and kind. They called it the wait and see. Travelers would sit there with their coffee or their thoughts, listening to the rain and letting the noise drain out of them. Some stayed minutes, at hours. Nobody has stayed the same. There's a power in stillness, a wealth in quiet that folks these days keep overlooking. But not there, never there. One spring, a young couple came through, woman expecting her first child and her husband, nervous and folk holding her hand, and it was the last thing tethering him to the earth. They'd lost their savings to a bad investment, near lost their home too. "We needed a breeze," she said to a farmer nearby, who pointed them at the hill. So they went walking slow, not talking much. When they reached the oak, the rain had yet started, soft and patient. They sat under the branches, and he asked her, "You think we'll be all right?" She looked out at the valley, where the fields were glistening green again, and said, "If the rain keeps coming, so will we." That was enough. They stayed till dusk, then left something small behind. A baby knitted mitten, blue and clean, a token for the future, I suppose. Years later, another traveler found it half buried in leaves, still bright, still whole, proof that even the smallest hope can survive the weather. Now and then, old men from nearby towns would visit, bringing their regrets and their reckonings. One came every year on the same day, always at dawn. And he never spoke. He didn't knelt, touched the ground, and left a sip, playing card fade down, always a seven of hearts. Nobody had asked why. Some debts, it seems, get paid in silence. There were seasons when the rain didn't come, when the earth cracked and the grass turned brittle. Folks worried the oak might finally give in, but it never did. Its roots reached too deep, its patience too well practiced. Even in drought, it stood green when an else brown dan. They said it had drunk so much time over the years that it no longer needed water. Maybe that was true. Maybe patience itself had become its nourishment. At every time the rain returned, because it always did, it fell hardest on that hill first, like the sky remembered what it owed a debt. You could see the drops darken the soil, circle the roots, and disappear down deep, feeding something old and sacred. Some haunted a miracle, others told it balance. The wiser ones next called it nature, time paying back what it borrowed. Eventually the story of the rain ledger made its way beyond the valley.
One magazine ran an article about it, talking all fancy about intergenerational mindfulness and rural financial philosophy. They use woods that make the old cowboy laugh himself hoarse. But even through all the city talk, the truth still shone through that a man once lived slow, earned honest, and left behind a kind of wealth the world couldn't measure. People from all over started coming, but not the kind that ruined a place. These were quiet folk, the kind who needed a place to listen. The oak listened back. There was one thing everyone noted, though. No matter who came, no matter when, it always started to rain. Not heavy, not fierce, just steady, enough to wet your shoulders, enough to make you look up. The locals didn't think much of it anymore. You just check in the books, they'd say, smiling toward the hill, and in a way they were right. Some debts ain't about money, some are about time and love and gratitude. And the rain, the only thing patient enough to collect them. And so the oak stands still, the bench worn smooth, the legend alive.
The air there feels different, thicker somehow. Each breath costs a little patience to earn. Maybe that's what makes it holy, a place that don't rush you, a place that reminds you that slow ain't dead, it's eternal. Someday, long after all our names have washed away, that oak will still be there, roots tangled with memory, branches drinking the sky, the rain will keep moving, the soil will keep answering, and time will keep compounding on itself with interest on kindness. And when the wanderer, tired and broke from the world, hurry, finds that hill and sits under the tree, they'll hear what every soul hears when it read to understand you can't keep nothing forever. But patience, now that one investment that never runs dry, long after the stories faded into folklore, and the people who'd known the old cowboy by name were nothing but weather-read or photographs in family chests, the rain still came to that valley. Seasons changed, empires rose and crumbled, and the world forgot how to wait. But the hill with the oak remembered. It had a way of holding on to time, stretching every second at taffy, slowing the world down to the pace of breath and heartbeat. The grass that grew there seemed greener, thicker, the soil richer, darker. Maybe it was all that patience soaked deep inside it. Or maybe it was just the land doing what it always did, returning what it was given. There was a road now, paved and proper, that wound close enough for passersby to catch a glimpse of the oak. Folks would stop sometimes, truckers, drifters, people between now and there, pulled by something they couldn't quite name. They'd step out, stretch their legs, breathe the air, and find themselves walking toward the tree without really meaning to. It had that pull, a stillness so deep it reached inside you, made the noise fall away until all you could hear was the hum of your own thinking. One summer, a preacher from the city came through, chasing what he called divine inspiration. He'd been preaching too fast, he said, talking too loud, feeling the crowd slip further from his words each week. They don't hear, read no more, he confessed to the farmer who pointed him toward the hill. Maybe I ain't listening right. He went up there alone and stayed till the moon rose, sitting quiet, the dust beneath that oak. When he came back down, his eyes looked softer. You find what you were looking for? The farmer asked. The preacher smiled small and said, no, but I found what I'd been running from. Then he left without another word. Folks in his congregation said his sermons got slower after that. Shorter too, but people started listening again. Guess the rain taught him the value of a pause. Then came the girl from the city university, an artist, they said, studying environment and installations. She wanted to photograph the oak, paint it, maybe even make a sculpture inspired by it. She showed up with cameras, sketch pads, and the kind of restless energy you could almost hear buzzing off her skin. But when she reached the hill, something changed. She didn't take a single fish for hours. She just sat there, sketchbook closed, staring at the light sifting through the leaves. I thought I came to capture it, she told the locals later, but it captured me instead. She never built her sculpture. Said it would have been wrong to rush something meant to be eternal. Instead, she wrote a poem. One verse, one truth. The rain does not hurry, yet it fills every root. Over the years, the oak became a kind of silent teacher. It didn't judge, didn't preach, didn't even demand belief. It just stood there, patient-made always, offering a quiet kind of correction to a world gone too fine. Folks said you could measure your own hurry by how long you could sit beneath it without reaching for your phone, your watch, your worries. The longer you lasted, the lighter you felt. And if you stayed long enough for the rain to start, something happened. Not dramatic, not mystical, just a kind of alignment, like the world finally caught its breath through you. It was enough to make a man cry, though most didn't. They just sat still and let it happen. There's a story told now among the truckers who drive that stretch of highway at night. They say when the rain comes and the moon low, you can see a shadow sitting at the base of the oak hat, brim pulled down, shoulders still, head slightly bowed. Not spooky-like, not ghostly, yet there, watching, waiting. Some say at the cowboy himself, keeping his post, making sure the patience of the world don't wash away with the rest of it. Others say it's just how the tree bends, a trick of the branches and the lightning. But every man who's seen it swears the same thing, that right before it fades, they hear a voice low and steady out gravel and honey. You keep it slow now, son. Let the rain do the work. Then the storm move on, and so do they, different somehow, calmer, like a debt just got forgiven. Scientists came once, folks with drones and meters, looking to study why the soil around that oak stayed damp longer than anywhere else. They took samples, measurements, notes. They found nothing unusual, no underground springs, no trick of terrain, just rich soil holding moisture longer than it should. They wrote it anomaly. The locals called it memory. That land remembers being watered, one old farmer said, and it waiting its turn to give back again. The rain ledger, they started calling it first in story, then in a lesson, then a way of living. There were books written, podcasts recorded, all talking about the philosophy of the legend. Most of it was fine, if a bit too clever for its own good. But buried beneath the fancy words and theories was the same truth that Cowboy had lived and died by. Patience compounds. In money, in love, in time. The world will pay you back in peace if you give it the patience to work things out. And even now, when the rains come harder than they should, when thunder rolls across that valley like a drum beat from somewhere older than man himself, the oak still stands. Roots deep, leaves wide, bark scarred but strong. And if you listen close, real close, you might just hear the faintest sound under the patter of rain. A slow, steady scratching, like a pen moving across paper. The earth perhaps still keeping its account, still writing in the quiet language of those who knew that wealth, real wealth, ain't what you own, it what you learn to wait for.
Sometimes, when the wind would crawl low through the grass and the rain held off a bit long enough for the air to taste like a promise, the locals swore they could still feel him. Not see, not hear, but feel. That same steady hum that used to live in his voice when he talked about the long gain, the slow turn of seasons, the quiet compound of patience, the kind of rhythm that never needed applause. It was as if the land itself had taken his heartbeat and kept it, folded it into its own pulse so it would never fade. You could sense it in the ground, in the way the oak branches creaked, in the hush between raindrops. It wasn't haunting, it was harmony. One evening, not long before the town festival, a small boy got lost wandering up that hill. His folks were frantic, searching till dusk. The sheriff found him sitting on the bench beside the oak, legs swinging, calm man you please. You weren't scared? The sheriff asked, kneeling down. The boy shook his head. No, sir, he said. An old man told you to wait. Kimmy
said the rain would show the way home. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, thinking maybe he was making him stories. But sure enough, a soft drizzle had started, and in the wet grass were footprints leading straight back toward town. Small ones, sure, but beside them were prints too deep and wide to belong to a boy. When they followed him, they faded halfway down the hill. The sheriff didn't say nothing to the parents about it, but he tipped his hat toward the oak before they left. After that, folks started leaving toys and trinkets at the roots. A marble here, a carved horse there. Little things, small debts of gratitude to whatever guardian spirit they believed still kept watch. It wasn't worship, just respect, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that turns things. Some souls don't move on because they don't need to. They've already found what they were waiting for. Years kept rolling, same as they always do.
The highway widened. New towns sprang up down the valley, and life got faster than ever. But every storm, every flash flood, every drought that came, the oak endured.
Became the center of a story told across generations, a reminder that steadiness ain't weakness, that time's greatest prophet is peace. Preachers quoted it, teachers used it, parents told it to restless kids when they couldn't sleep. There's an old tree up north, they'd whisper, where the rain keeps its promise. If you listen close, you can hear it counting the seconds slow. And still, every spring, new faces came. Some brought questions they couldn't ask out loud. Others brought burdens they couldn't put down anywhere else, but they left lighter, somehow. The rain has that way about it. It don't fix, it don't rush, it just soft-fed what hard until it yields on its own. One young woman, heartbroken after losing her farm to foreclosure, came and sat there till her shoes were soaked through. When she finally stood, she whispered, "I'll start again." That was all she said. But her voice didn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounded like soil after rain, ready. Some say that what the old cowboy left behind, not just wisdom, but permission. Permission to start over, to move slow, to let life be what it is instead of what we demand it to be. Strange kind of inheritance, but maybe the own kind worth passing down.
One autumn, a writer from far away came to visit. He'd heard the story, same man he had, and wanted to see it for himself. He brought a tape recorder, notebooks, and a camera with lenses long enough to catch the glistening dew on the bark, but after 2 days in the valley, he hadn't recorded a word. He'd spent the whole time sitting under the oak, not even taking pictures. When he finally packed up to leave, a local asked if he'd gotten what he came for. The man smiled, weary but peaceful. "I came looking for a story," he said, "but I found a truth instead. You don't tell stories like this. You live slow enough for them to tell you." His article never got published. But months later, a small note appeared in a local paper under the obituaries section. No name, no date, just a single line. In a world too fast to listen. He remembered the wait. Folks who knew the legend read it and smiled. They didn't need to guess who it was for. Maybe it was for him.
Maybe it was for the cowboy. Maybe it was for anyone who really learned the worth of silence. And so the rain kept falling, spring after spring, storm after storm, kept coming back to that same hill, to that same tree, like a banker checking on an account that never stopped growing. And every drop that hit the soil made a sound that no man could replicate, A sound that wasn't quite thunder, wasn't quite whisper, but something in between. The sound of compounding grace, the sound of patience collecting interest, the sound of the world remembering how to breathe again. On rare nights, when the valley fog hung thick and silver, and the moon cut through like a lantern, travelers swear they've seen figures gathering near the oak. Not ghosts, just shapes, outlines, maybe echoes. Working men in coats, women in shawls, a boy with a marble in his hand, all sitting quiet, heads bowed, listening to the rain, like the earth was hosting its own congregation.
Yeah.
Maybe it was for the cowboy, maybe it was for anyone who would learn the worth of silence. And so the rain kept falling, spring after spring, storm after storm, kept coming back to that same hill, to that same tree, like a banker checking on an account that never stopped growing, and every drop that hit the soil made a sound that no man could replicate, a sound that wasn't quite thunder, wasn't quite whisper, but something in between. The sound of compounding grace, the sound of patience collecting interest, the sound of the world remembering how to breathe again on rare nights, when the valley fog hung thick and silver and the moon cut through like a lantern. Travelers swear they've seen figures gathering near the oak. Not ghosts, just shapes, outlines, maybe echoes. Working men in coats, women in shawls, a boy with a marble in his hand. All sitting quiet, heads bowed, listening to the rain, like the earth was hosting its own congregation. And if you step close enough without scaring the moment off, you can sometimes hear what they're all humming, that same old hymn that ain't written in any book, but passed down from storm to storm, from one patient soul to another. Wait well. Spend kind, rest easy. And when the wind finally carries the hymn away, the rain fills in the silence again, steady, even, endless. The ledger keeps balancing, the roots keep deepening, and the world, despite itself, remembers the lesson one more time. It was said that the oak grew a little wider every year, but no one made it happening. That's how patience works. It don't announce itself. You wake one day, and what you thought was small has become something mighty, rooted so deep it would take the world itself to move it. The branches reach further now, shading half the hillside, spreading like an old man arms pulling the whole valley in for a long, slow embrace. The bark had gone rougher, the grooves deeper, as if time had been writing stories across it instead of taking them away. Children grew up under that oak, playing tag in the tall grass, collecting acorns like coins. The parents watched from the bench, saying nothing but thinking plenty. Some brought books, others kites. It was a place where silence didn't need filling, where thought could stretch without snapping. And every so often the rain would come, not pouring, just whispering soft enough to cool the skin and remind everyone that nothing on this earth lasts without a little watering. In the evenings, when the sun would melt low behind the western ridge, the light would hit that tree just right, turn the valley gold. The wind would hum through the branches, low and steady, sounding near like a man clearing his throat before telling the truth. The locals came to call that hour the balance. They said it was when the day noise evened out, when the land took account of what it had given and what it had kept. Folks sit quiet for it, hats off, heads bowed, not praying, not mourning, but acknowledging. You could almost hear the earth settling its books. The town itself began to change around that quiet. Not quick, not loud, but slow, like a tide turning over generations. The people who lived nearest the valley worked steady but never rushed. They took their time with things, crops, carpentry, kindness. Outsiders said they were behind the times. Locals said they were ahead of their piece. Banks in nearby towns started using the oak data symbol in their windows. Steady growth, honest roots. Some company even printed pamphlets about the rain ledger principle. They asked, "No, you fancy way to talk about saving what matters and letting time do the work." But even the marketers couldn't strip it of its truth. That story was too old, too lived in to be bought or sold. Now and then a storm would come strong enough to shake the whole valley. Thunder would roll like judgment, lightning would split the sky, and folks would hold their breath, wondering if that oak could stand another one. But it always did, every real time. When the clouds cleared, there it was, leaned maybe, scarred maybe, but alive, always alive. That became its own kind of sermon. You could weather anything, longer your roots are deep and your patience deeper. There was one storm in particular, a real howhud, the kind that tore shingles clean off roofs and sent fences flying. After it passed, folks climbed up the hill, worrying they'd find the oak toppled, but there it stood, proud and upright, though the lightning had split one of its main limbs right down the middle. When they touched the trunk, it was warm, still humming faint like a living thing. And in the crack the lightning left behind, they found something curious, a piece of old folded paper, dry bone, wedged in the wood like it'd been keeping itself safe there for decades. They eased it out gentle, and sure enough, it was a page from the ledger. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. When you give the world your patience, it always pays you back in peace. Might not be the same coin, but it'll be the same worth. They framed it and hung it in the library in town. Folks pass by it still. They read it out loud, others a nod. Nobody knows how that page ended up there. Some say the roots wrote it up from the soil. Others think the tree had been keeping it along, waiting for a storm strong enough to share it again. Either way, it fit. Like the vent had spoken through fire to remind everyone what mattered. Generin came and went. The valley name changed, the borders shifted, and maps were redrawn. But the oak never cared for names or lines. It stayed right where it was, keeping its quiet watch. People moved faster everywhere else. Talk got shorter, tempers got thinner, and money got quicker. But somehow, that old story outlived the rush. It found its way into things unseen. A saying here, a whisper there, a lesson passed down over supper or storm. Do it the ledger way, they'd say, meaning wait your turn, trust the rain. And maybe that the truest kind of immortality, not statues, not stories in books, but ideas that outlive the mouth that spoke them. The kind that settle in the bones of a place, changing the people who walk it without them even knowing why. That valley had patience written into its dirt. Every sprout, every droplet, every root knew it. Even the air seemed to move slower, like it respected the rhythm too much to rush. They say one day, centuries from now, the oak might finally fall. Not from rot or ruin, but from the weight of its own years. And when it does, the sound, the et for miles, soft thunder across the plains, the final balance of a long-kept ledger. The soil will drink its memory. The roots will turn to nourishment, and from its shadow there'll rise a dozen new sprouts, each one small, uncertain, but patient, ready to start a death, ready to earn slow, give often, and leave easy, ready to wait well. And when that happens, when those new trees take their place in the rhythm of rain and time, the world will remember all over again, not 'cause someone told it to, but 'cause patience never dies. It just grows quieter, deeper, and truer, waiting for someone to listen. By the time the next century settled over the valley, the rest of the world had forgotten how to move slow. Cars flew through highways faster than thunder used to roll. Lights stayed on long when the stars wanted their turn, and people counted worth in seconds instead of seasons. But that hill with its old oak and soft hum of soil stayed outside all that noise.
It didn't refuse the future. It didn't rush to greet it. There was still a peace up there that you couldn't explain, only feel. The kind that made a person's heartbeat slow down without permission, like time itself was offering you a chair. The oak had weather-read centuries by then. Bark thick armor, branches wide enough to shelter a family of deer from a full storm. Around its base, wildflowers grew every spring, bright yellow and soft white, like the land was celebrating something it remembered, but didn't need to name. And deep below, the roots had turned the ground into a map of memory. Some folks swore you could hear it if you laid your ear to the dirt, said it sounded like a heartbeat. Some said it was the ledger still writing, each drop of rain adding another entry. Nobody argued much about which it was. Either way, it was alive. One day, a woman from the city came to see it, an older woman, with silver in her hair and weariness in her shoulders.
She'd read about the oak in an old archive tucked between studies on folk sustainability, eco-financial philosophy. But what caught her wasn't the science or the myth. It was a single quote buried at the bottom of the article. He waited well. That line had sat in her chest like a stone was since. She didn't know why, only that she needed to see the place it came from. When she reached the hill, she was alone. The town below was quiet, most folks gone to work, the road slick from last night's rain. She climbed slow, boots digging into the soft earth, breath coming out steady clouds. When she reached the oak, she stopped. The air was thick, still damp, smelling faintly of life renewing itself. The tree towered above her, its roots curling around the mound like protecting arms. She set down her pack, took off her coat, and sat beneath it. No phone, no camera, just silence. For a long while she didn't think of much, just listened to the quiet and the faint creak of branches in the wind. The kind of sound that fills all the space inside you, that noise leaves empty. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter she'd written to herself years ago, back when she thought money was the only way to measure a life. The ink was faded, but she could still read the words. When I have enough, I'll rest. She read it twice, smiled sad, and whispered, "You fool, you never knew you already did." Then she tore it slow, piece by piece, letting the scraps fall to the roots where the rain would take care of them. She stayed there to dusk. When the first drops began to fall, she tilted her head back, eyes closed, and laughed. A deep, tired laugh that sounded more like a sigh of relief. The rain came steady but soft, the way it always did. And though she couldn't say why, she felt like the land was thanking her if an old promise had just been kept. When she left the next morning, she didn't take nothing, no bark, no photos, not even a leaf. She just walked back down the hill slower than she'd come up. At the foot of the trail, she turned once more to look at the oak. "You waited for me too," she said softly, and for a moment the wind stilled. Then the branches swayed again, gentle and sure, like nodding in agreement. Years later, her children came across her journal. Inside was one final entry. "I found a place that time breathes, where every worry becomes rain and every dream finds its root." If you would go there, don't take pictures, just listen. You'll know what to do. That entry started the journey again. Her children made the trip, then their children after them. It became a tradition, not a tourist one, but something closer to a pilgrimage. Families would go there once in their lives to sit in the quiet and learn how to be small again. The oak didn't belong to anyone, but it welcomed everyone, and the rain, true to its old rhythm, always came, never failed. Generations later, a museum was built in the nearby town, small, humble, wood instead of steel. They called it the Ledger House. Why? Inside were three things: the old framed page with that hand-scrawled line about patience and peace, a thin bench carved from a fallen branch of the oak, and a recording, not of music or speech, but of rain steady, soft, endless. It played on a loop, filling the room with the sound that had taught more about wealth than any book or man ever would. Visitors came and went, some staying for minutes and for hours. Nobody left unchanged. There is say carved above the doorway there now, burnished deep into the wood so the sun hits it just right every evening. It says what you wait for becomes what you're worth, and that the truth that keeps the world turning even when it forgets how to slow down. Patience ain't passive. It's the purest kind of work, the kind that builds something in you while the rest of the world is burning itself out trying to sprint to nowhere. That old cowboy knew it, the rain knew it, the land still knows it. And if you stand under that oak long enough, quiet enough, you'll feel it to a wait kind of wealth, dripping down through the leaves, sinking into your bones, yet grace. And when you walk away from that hill, no matter who you are or what you've lost, you'll find yourself whispering what every soul who have been there says before they go. Thank you for waiting. By the time another 100 years had rolled through that valley, the oak had become less a landmark and more a kind of living scripture. You couldn't talk about patience, time, or work without someone eventually mentioning the hill and the tree that outlasted every man who tried to measure it. The maps taught it the Ledger Oak, though no one alive remembered the cowboy who first wrote that word. Didn't matter. Some stories get so old they stop belonging to people. They start belonging to the world instead. The path up the hill had worn deep now, grooved by generations of boots. Grass still grew along the edges, soft and steady, and when the wind blew just right, it carried the sound of the leaves like pages turning. Some folks said that was the tree remembering back through all the lives that had sat beneath it. Lovers, wanderers, preachers, sin, all of them equal in the hush of that place. Nobody stayed long, and yet nobody really left. That was the magic of it. You'd walk away lighter, but part of you always stayed, buried quiet in the roots. One winter, a boy from the city came no older than 16, ran away, they said, after his father lost the family fortune to bad trades and worse debts. The boy had anger in him, sharp to wire. He didn't believe in slow things, didn't believe in second chance. But the storm that night drove him to the valley. He found the oak by accident, soaked to the bone, hands shaking from cold and rage though. He crawled under the branches to wait the rain out, muttering curses under his breath. Everything takes too long, he spat. Everything breaks too easy. The wind answered him with a long sigh through the leaves. Then, somewhere above, a branch cracked, not loud, not fallen, that shifted. A drop of water landed right on his forehead, slid down to his lips. He wiped it off, but another came, then another. And soon he realized the tree was leaking the rain threw just one small rake in the canopy right over him. He moved to the side, but no matter where he sat, another drop would find him. It was as if the oak itself wouldn't let him stay dry until he listened, so he did. For hours he sat there, letting the rain tap against him slow and steady. By morning, the anger was gone. He walked down the hill and went home. Years later, that same boy became a farmer, patience and sunrise, raising crops on time and trust instead of panic. And when his children tend him why he never rushed to harvest, he'd say, "The rain don't hurry, and neither should we." People started telling that story too. Each generation added a little, polished it at a stone. Some said the tree tested all who sat beneath it. Some said it healed them. Either way, the lesson stayed the same. The oak gave you what you were missing, but only if you stopped long enough to notice. Over time, the Ledger House down in town grew bigger. They built a library wing, filled with letters and journals folks had left behind after visiting the hill. Pages about loss, renewal, forgiveness, starting again. You could read them and feel like the rain itself had written them. One letter from a woman in her 70s said, "I sat there for 4 hours and didn't think once about my regrets. That more freedom than I have bought in my life." Another, written by a man fresh out of prison, said, "I ain't good at talking to God, but I think that tree listens just fine." Some thought it superstition, others called it soul, but nobody denied what the place did to people. It slowed them down, made them human again. That was worth more than all the sermons in the world. In the spring of the bicentennial, the rain came heavy, 3 days straight, the kind that tests everything that ebb stood too long. The town flooded, roads washed out, but still the oak held. When the clouds broke, the townsfolk climbed the hill to check. The ground was slick, the air thick with steam rising off the soil. The oak looked different then, not smaller, not weaker, just tired. You could see the years in it. Bark cracked deep, branches low. It had carried patience longer than any living soul could imagine, and maybe it was ready to rest. That summer, it bloomed one last time. Thousands of blossoms, white starlight covered its limbs. Nobody had seen it flower before. The air smelled sweet and alive, and bees came from miles around to drink from it. The valley shone brighter than it had. Folks said it felt like a farewell. When autumn came, the petals fell in slow spirals, drifting across the hillside like snow. Every flake of white carried something of the rain with it, small, steady miracles floating down to seed the next chapter. And when winter followed, the oak finally gave way. No storm, no lightning, no violence. It just leaned slow and bowing to the earth that had held it for so long and settled into the soil. The sound echoed low through the valley, not a crash, but a sigh. The kind of sound that said, "It done enough, it enough." People came from every corner of the land to see what was left. They didn't mourn. They stood there, hats off, heads bowed, listening to the silence the tree had left behind. It wasn't empty, it was full of time, of patience, of all the rain that had fallen. The townsfolk built a small stone marker where the roots had been, but they didn't carve a name on it. Just one phrase, simple and true. It waited for us all. Not long after, the ground around it began to stir. Little green shoots, soft and bright, raking through the dark soil, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. A forest, slow but certain, just beginning. The rain came a bend that night, light at a whisper. It fell on the sprouts, on the soil, on the stone, and kept falling steady and sure. Like the world itself was citing another page in the same old ledger, one that never truly closed. And if you stood there quiet enough, you could hear it again. The rhythm of patience, the ache of a man who once learned to wait, teaching the earth how to do the same. The song never ended, it just grew roots. Seasons began to pass over that valley like brushstrokes on an endless canvas, each one laying its color down atop the memory of the last. The little sprouts that had pushed through the soil after the fall of the ledger oak began to take shape, growing taller, leaner, learning the song of the rain just as the old one had. The first of them bent in the wind as if bowing to what came before, their leaves shimmering silver green when thunder rolled in the distance. Folks started calling it the Grove of Waiting. They said it wasn't a forest of trees, but a forest of lessons, all rooted in the same truth, that time don't forget those who respect it. The town below the hill had changed plenty by then. Machines hummed louder, screens glowed brighter, and the hum of life had quickened again, as if the world had forgotten for a spell how to breathe slow. But even with the voice, there were still travelers who came from faraway places, sake to sit among the new oaks, pilgrims of patience they called themselves. Some were rich beyond reason, dug poor beyond remedy. But all of them came searching for the same thing, the kind of peace that can't be bought, the kind you won't find after you've lost everything that ain't real. There was one such traveler who stood out, a man named Walter Creed. He was a financier once, the sort of man who lived by numbers, wake to sleep, buy to sell. He had built empires of glass and light, watching zeros multiply until they no longer meant a thing. Then came the crash, the kind that takes more than your money. His fortune vanished faster than a gust across dry plains, and all that remained was the noise of what he'd built ringing in his head long after the applause had died. For years he wandered city to city, trying to fix something that wasn't broken but lost. He found the story of the Ledger Oak by accident. But even with that noise, there were still travelers who came from faraway places, sent to sit among the new oaks. Pilgrims of patience, they called themselves. Some were rich beyond reason, some poor beyond remedy. But all of them came searching for the same thing, the kind of peace that can't be bought, the kind you won't find after you've lost everything that ain't real. There was one such traveler who stood out, a man named Walter Creed. He was a financier once, the sort of man who lived by numbers, wake to sleep, buy to sell. He had built empires of glass and light, watching zeros multiply until they no longer meant a thing. Then came the crash, the kind that takes more than your money. His fortune vanished faster than a gust across dry plains, and all that remained was the noise of what he'd built ringing in his head long after the applause had died. For years he wandered city to city, trying to fix something that wasn't broken but lost himself. He found the story of the Ledger Oak by accident, a museum plaque, half-faded, tucked between exhibits on economic myths of rural America. He nearly walked past it, but that phrase caught him the way lightning catches a mountaintop. It waited for us all. He didn't know why, but those words burned through the fog he'd been living in. So he booked a train, then a bus, then hitched the rest of the way on the back of a farmer truck. 3 days later, he was standing at the foot of that hill. The climb near broke him. His body had forgotten what real ground felt like, how it pushes back, how it tests you just to remind you you're still alive. But when he reached the grove, breath ragged, heart thumping, he saw the saplings, all tall now, all swaying with that same rhythm the old oak once kept. He walked between them slow, hand brushing the bark, eyes lifting to the sky where rain clouds were starting to gather again. He sat beneath the tallest one and closed his eyes. The air smelled of wet wood and old memory. He didn't pray, didn't speak, just listened. Hours passed, rain came, gentle and persistent, the way it always had, gnawing. He shaped me and tucked between exhibits on economic myths of rural America. He nearly walked past it, but that phrase caught him the way lightning catches a mountaintop. It waited for us all. They didn't know why, but those words burned through the fog he'd been living in. So he booked a train, then a bus, then hitched the rest of the way on the back of a farmer truck. 3 days later, he was standing at the foot of that hill. The climb near broke him. His body had forgotten what real ground felt like, how it pushes back, how it tests you just to remind you you're still alive. But when he reached the grove, breath ragged, heart thumping, he saw the saplings, all tall now, all swaying with that same rhythm the old oak once kept. He walked between them slow, hand brushing the bark, eyes lifting to the sky where rain clouds were starting to gather again. He sat beneath the tallest one and closed his eyes. The air smelled of wet wood and old memory. He didn't pray, didn't speak, just listened. Hours passed. Rain came, gentle and persistent, the way it always had. He thought of his fortune, of the men he'd hired, fired, envied, and outbid, thought of his father, who'd worked with his hands, and his son, who barely knew how to. Then, through the whisper of rain, he heard something, not a voice, not exact, but close, like a thought that wasn't his own. You can't own time, you can only trade with it. He didn't know if it was his mind or the grove, but he wrote the words down in his notebook, then underlined M twice. He stayed 3 days, ate little, slept less, but felt more awake than he had in decades. When he finally walked back down to town, folks barely recognized him. The hardness in his eyes was gone. He moved slow, not because he was weak, but because he was choosing to. He donated what remained of his wealth to rebuilding the Ledger house, said it ought to be a place for learning how to wait again. Then he disappeared, leaving behind only a note. If you ever feel poor, remember patience pays in peace. The years that followed turned Creed's visit into another story, another et in the long chain of whispers that surrounded that hill. Pilgrims came more frequent after that, bankers, writers, farmers, all carrying their own reckoning. Each one left something behind: a coin, a letter, a watch that no longer ticked. The caretakers of the grove collect these offerings and buried them at the base of the largest tree. They had it the Root Fund, said it wasn't about wealth, it was about weight, leaving your burdens behind so the land could compost them into something better. Eventually, even the caretakers grew old. They passed the duty down generation to generation, but none of them called it work. You don't tend to patience, one old keeper said. You let patience tend to you, and so they did. The grove thickened with age, the trunks darkening, the leaves broad and full of whispering. When the wind passed through, it sounded at 1,000 soft pages turning at once, like the whole world remembering what it had almost forgotten. They say that on certain nights, rainy ones, especially if you walk the path up to the grove, you can still hear more than that the storm. You can hear the old cowboy voice, steady and warm, telling the same truth he spoke all those lifetimes ago. The richest man ain't the one who has the most, but the one who learned how to wait. If you stand there long enough, you'll feel it too. Not in your wallet, but in your chest. A slow, strong beat that matches the rain, the rhythm of patience, the sound of a debt long paid, and a promise still being kept. As the decades turned again, the grove became something between a sanctuary and a legend. New towns rose on the horizon, steel bones and glass skin, humming with lights that never slept. But that hill stayed quiet, the rain still claiming its rhythm the way a heart keeps its beat. The people who lived in those cities started speaking quicker, thinking shorter, and buying faster. But there were always a few, just a few, who felt the noise gnawing at the edges of their souls. Those were the ones who found their way back to the grove of waiting. They didn't come looking for wisdom. Some came because they'd heard the place could heal heartbreak or guilt or the ache that money never meds. But what they found, each and every one, was the same soft truth. Time is the only honest currency this world don't know. There was a young woman named Clara Voss, one of those bright types born with too much ambition and not enough time to feed it. She worked the markets from sunrise to moonset, living off coffee and numbers, chasing the kind of wealth you can never catch because it runs faster than your peace. One winter, after a streak of deals gone bad, she packed her bag and headed west. Said later she didn't even know why, just followed a whisper she couldn't name. When she got off the bus, the air smelled of rain and old wood smoke. She asked a local about the Ledger Oak, and the man smiled, said, "Ain't one tree no more, miss, it a grove now." But you'll find what you're looking for, same as the rest of us. Clara climbed the hill slow, shoes slipping in the wet earth, and when she reached the grove, the world went quiet. Not empty, just still. She could hear the breath between raindrops, the soft sway of branches like a lullaby older than language. She sat beneath one of the younger trees, hands trembling, tears she didn't understand running down her face. For years, she'd fought against time, tried to bend it, buy it, outsmart it. But under those leaves, it felt different. Time wasn't her enemy there, it was her teacher. She stayed until the rain turned to mist. Then he opened her journal and wrote one line: "I don't need more years, I need deeper ones." That became her rule. She went back to the city, but not to chase. She started a company that measured success not in dollars, but in days well spent, hours shared, not hoarded. And when reporters asked her years later how she came up with her philosophy, she smiled and said, "A tree taught to compound interest." Word of her spread. Stories like that tend to. People started speaking in of the grove, not dead a myth, but as something sacred. Universities sent scholars to study it. Governments tried to fence it. Investors offered to buy it, but none succeeded. The caretakers refused every Can't own patience, they'd say. You could only practice it. And so the grove stayed free. It didn't ask for belief, didn't need protection. It just waited, the way it always had. Eventually, the caretakers passed, and their children took the post. But one of them, a man named Elias Ridge, did more than tend the roots. He began collecting the stories people left behind, letters, carvings, even the quiet words spoken in the rain. He wrote them down in a book he called the Balanced Ledger. No chapters, no order, just entries. He said it wasn't meant to be read, only to be added to. He filled 3 volumes before he died, and now there are shelves of them in the ledger house. Each page a reminder that the rain never really stops. It just changes form. One of the entries reads, "I came me thinking patience was waiting for the world. Turns out it letting the world wait for you." Another says, "The soil forgives faster than men. That why things grow later." And one more written in a shaky hand, "Every mistake I made was such a seed planted too soon. Folks say you can't read too many pages of that book at once. It'll slow your heartbeat to match the rhythm of the rain. Years rolled on. The grove grew thicker, taller, darker. The rain seemed to fall softer there than anywhere else. Like it respected the roots too much to come down angry. Scientists called it a microclimate. The old ones called it grace. And maybe both were right. The balance between faith and fact was always thin in that place. The earth didn't mind which side you stood on, long and you stood still long enough to listen. Then came a time when the world forgot again. Faster machines, louder voices, greed disguised in progress. The valley shrank on the maps, the ledger house fell quiet, and fewer travelers came. For a while, it seemed like patience had finally been priced out. But that's the thing about lessons built from rain and roots. They don't vanish, they just wait. And sure enough, when the world engines finally sputtered and folks found themselves broke, not in pocket but in spirit, they remembered someone pulled the old story from the archives. Someone else walked the path again. Before long, the grove was full of footsteps once more. The cycle had returned, same the seasons. On a summer night not too long ago, a storm rolled through. Soft thunder, warm rain, air thick with light. The grove shimmered in the lightning flash, leaves trembling like applause. Down in the town, a child woke and asked her mother, "What that sound?" The woman smiled, held her close, and whispered, "That the world remembering how to wait." And up on the hill, beneath the tallest oak, the earth glowed faint under the rain. Though the roots themselves were whispering back, we never forgot. The sound of it spread through the valley, over rivers and rails, over tired hearts and restless hands, calling every soul that still believed there was peace to be earned the slow way, the way of rain, the way of patience, the way of the ledger. The morning after that storm, the sky broke open, clean and pale, the kind of blue that looked like a promise kept. The air smelled sweet, full of wet bark and sunlight slipping through the mist like gold dust, sifted by angels. The grove stood steady, every branch glittering with drops, every leaf humming the say-old tune. You could almost feel it breathing. The people who lived down in town said that on mornings like that you could hear the rain talking in its sleep, not words exactly, just that quiet rhythm that said, "We're still here." A group of students from the city came that week. They were studying what they call temporal economics. Until knowing up the I meet and say, "We all got we can pack, you know. Oh, it's local. Looked around the grove and said, "It's smaller than I thought." The caretaker, an old woman named Ruth, smiled, her voice low and soft, the worn flannel. "That 'cause you're looking at the trees, not the time between them." The boy blinked, confused, and she just chuckled. "You'll get it when the rain comes." Sure enough, that evening the clouds rolled in. The students set up their little camp, their tents glowing like fireflies in the dim light. Ruth told them they'd be safe so long they stayed quiet. "Rain don't like being talked over," she said. "It listens best to silence." So they sat, the city noise still rattling in their heads, trying to adjust to the emptiness that wasn't empty at that. And when the first drops fell, they stopped counting. The rain that night wasn't loud. It came in slow waves, tapping against the soil like fingers drumming a lullaby. Owen lay awake in his tent, eyes open, heart oddly heavy. He thought of all the hours he'd spent chasing deadlines, trying to make numbers grow while his life shrank to fit the margins. And somewhere in that stillness, he heard it, the hum beneath the storm, low and deep, pulsing like a heartbeat too big for the earth to hold. It wasn't music, but it was melody. It wasn't speech, but it was truth. He didn't write any of it down, didn't need to. When he woke, the grove looked different. Not cause it had changed, but cause he had. The leaves shone with the color of understanding, and for the first time, he felt what Ruth had meant, the worth between things, the pause that makes the rest matter, the breath between the beats. When they packed up to leave, he stayed behind a minute longer, kneeling beside one of the younger trees. He pressed his hand to its trunk and whispered, "Thank you for waiting." Then he turned and walked back to the road, moving slower than when he'd come. Back in the city, Owen tried to explain it. His classmates didn't understand how good they were still too busy calculating time to feel it. But he changed his ways, quit his internship, started teaching instead. His lectures weren't about markets or metrics anymore. They were about rhythm, growth, and the patience of compound grace. He told his students, the problem ain't that we don't have enough time, it's that we don't respect the time we've got. He'd pause after saying it, every time, just long enough for the silence to mean something. His students started counting those pauses the rain sent, and for once, nobody tried to fill in. Years passed. Owen aged into an old man, gentle-voiced and slow-walking. He never went back to the grove, but the rhythm never left him. When he died, his granddaughter found a note folded in his wallet. It read, "Leave the world a little quieter than you found it." She took that note and brought it to the grove, buried it at the base of the oldest oak, whispering his words into the dirt. The rain started then, she covered the soil, and she laughed through her tears. "He waited well," she said. "Guess I'll try to too." And the grove heard her. That night, the rain didn't fall like usual. It danced short bursts, soft pause, a rhythm like breathing in a dream. The townsfolk said it sounded like a man laughing somewhere in the dark. Ruth smiled when she heard it. That the way of it, she said, the rain keeps what we give. Now they say that if you stand under that same tree where Owen Note sleeps and the rain catch you just right, you'll hear his voice etched low between the drops. Every second spent in peace is profit, and ain't that the richest truth there is? The grove endures, bigger, quieter, more alive than then. It don't ask for worship, don't of promises, it just waits, like it always has, teaching each new soul how to listen for what the world forgot. The wind through its branches sounds that time exhaling, the rain through its leaves sounds that mercy, remembering your name, and the ground beneath your feet hums soft and sure, saying patience pays, patience pays, patience pays. The old stories say one day the grove will cover the whole valley, that the rain will fall from it the gold thread, stitching every hurried heart back together. Maybe, just maybe, when that day comes, the world won't need reminders anymore. It'll know how to wait, it'll know how to grow, it'll know how to earn peace slow and honest, the way the rain ledger always meant it to be. Until then, the grove keeps its watch, the rain keeps its time, and the world keeps turning one soft drop at a time. They say the grove changed the air itself, that the valley began breathing slower, and the land had taken up the habit of waiting right along with its trees. Birds no longer rush their flight, they glide. Streams carved deeper paths, but did so gently, refusing to fight the stones. Even the wind, when it passed through, seemed to hum instead of howl. The place didn't resist time. It harmonized with it, like the whole valley had learned the melody of patience and was humming it back to the sky. Travelers still came, though not for what they used to. Some arrived with broken hearts, others with broken fortunes, but most came with something harder to mend, a kind of invisible hunger that no food or fame could fill. They'd sit beneath the oldest trees and wait, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Some found tears, some found peace, but all found quiet. And in that quiet, they learned what every soul eventually must, that life ain't a race, it a rhythm. There was a man named Jonah Hale, an engineer from Far East, the kind who built cities so big their shadows could hide a mountain. He came to the grove not because he believed in it, but because he'd lost the sound of himself. His machines had grown so loud he couldn't tell his own breath from the engines. He'd once loved building, but success had turned that love into hunger. When he heard about the grove, he laughed. A forest that teaches patience, he said. What next? A river that hands out forgiveness? But he came anyway. Curiosity is just disbelief waiting to be humbled. He arrived on a cool autumn morning. The path was slick with dew, and the air smelled like a promise. He climbed to the crest of the hill, where the wind was thick but quiet. No birds, no footsteps, just the slow creak of bark moving in rhythm with the breeze. He took off his jacket, sat down beneath a tall oak, and crossed his arms, impatient already. "Well," he said out loud to the trees, "I'm he. Do your miracle." The wind didn't answer. The leaves didn't stir. Only the smallest droplet of rain fell from a high branch and landed right on the bridge of his nose. He frowned, wiped it off, and muttered, "Figures." But the droplet came again and again, then more. Soon a slow, even drizzle began to fall, steady of breathing. He pulled his collar up, but didn't move. There was something about that rhythm. It wasn't random.
It was purposeful, gentle, patient. The sound hit the ground in perfect intervals. Like a metronome made of mercy, his heartbeat started matching it without him meaning to. The longer he sat, the slower it went. The rain soaked his hair, his clothes, his skin, until he couldn't tell where he ended and the grove began. Hours passed, though he didn't feel M. When the storm finally eased, he stood up different. Not younger, not wiser, just quieter inside. The kind of quiet that don't come from lack of sound, but from presence. Before he left, he carved something small into the trunk with his pocket knife, measured, not made. When the caretakers found it days later, they left it there. They said the grove had accepted his entry. Jonah went back east and stopped building towers. He started designing bridges instead, structures that connected without conquering. He told people the secret of good architecture was the same: a good living, leave room for wind and rain. When asked where he learned that, he smiled and said, "From the quietest teacher I met." Time kept its gentle roll. The grove grew thicker, the air heavier with history.
The Ledger House expanded once again, though it never lost its humility. A new wing was added, built entirely from fallen branches and reclaimed wood. The architects refused to cut a single tree. They called the new addition the Room of Rain. Inside, the ceiling dripped steady drops into a shallow basin. The water circled Clapperton through a hidden system that mimicked the heartbeat of the earth. Visitors would sit in that dim space, close their eyes, and listen. Some prayed, a cried, a suds breathed. The walls had no plaques, no signs, no noise, only the sound, only the lesson. Years later, a poet named Elsie Thorne wrote the line that would define the Grove Noué: "Patience is the currency of the soul, and the rain is its mint." The phrase spread like wildfire through the world noise. People printed it on coffee mugs, wrote it on walls, quoted it in speeches. Most forgot where it came from, but that was all right. The Grove didn't need credit. It only needed to be remembered in action. The valley, meanwhile, changed again. Technology kept marching, but slower now. Some cities began building Ledger Park's quiet sanctuaries in the middle of their chaos, modeled after the Grove. Rain mimicking fountains, wooden benches, soundproof canopies, all attempts to borrow a piece of that piece. But no matter how well they built, none and quite matched the real thing. The Grove's secret wasn't in its design, it was in its faith. The belief that growth in any form requires surrender. And still, after all that time, after all those lives, the rain kept falling. Soft, sure, sacred. It fell for those who waited and for those who hadn't yet learned how. It fell for the restless, the weary, the rich, and the broken. It fell for the world, because that's what rain does. It gives without asking, and it waits without judgment. Someday, they say, the grove will stop growing, not 'cause it did, but 'cause it done. The trees will reach the clouds, their tops catching the rain before it touches ground, and when that happens, the world below will live in a kind of shade, made not from branches, but from understanding, a stillness so wide you could fit eternity inside it. And maybe then, at long last, the old cowboy ledger will balance for good. Long after Jonah Bridge designs had become landmarks and Elsie Thorne words were etched in marble across universities and libraries, the Grove still stood dead. It always had neither seeking fame nor caring for it. Seasons folded into each other like the pages of a well-worn book, and each rainfall added another verse to its song. The caretakers had grown fewer, for the land didn't need much from people anymore. It kept its own pace. The trees had matured into pillars of shadow and memory. Their roots spread so wide that even the valley rivers bent a little to pass around them. The soil was rich beyond measure, dark and fragrant with the weight of centuries. You could bury a coin there, they said, and it'd grow into a lesson before spring. Every few years, wanderers would still make the climb. Some came on foot, ed in carriages or drones. Depending on what the world had become that decade, they'd stop at the edge of the grove and stand still, not because anyone told them to, because the quiet commanded it. Even in an age when silence had gone near extinct, the grove made it sacred again. Those who stayed long enough left with something you couldn't measure, or trade, or steadiness, like an old promise remembered. There was a story that made the rounds about that time of a boy named Remy Pike. He was 12 when he lost his parents to the storms that had been getting worse each year. Folks said the climate had turned unpredictable, all anger and exhaustion from years of taking without giving. The boy wandered west alone, carrying nothing but a tin locket and a small notebook his father had left him, filled with numbers and half-finished drawings. He didn't understand much of it, but one line written near the back caught his heart. Find the rain still sounds time till he followed it. Hitch rides with truckers, slept in abandoned barns, ate what strangers offered. When he finally reached the grove, he was ragged and thin, his shoes worn through at the toes. The valley was quiet that day, heavy with heat, not a drop of rain in sight. He thought maybe the story was just a story, but he walked anyway, all the way up the path until he reached the tallest oak at the center. He sat down, opened his father's notebook, and waited. Hours passed. The sun dipped, shadow sketches long across the hillside. Still no rain. The boy sighed and whispered, maybe the world's run out. But then the wind picked up, soft at first, then steady. The trees began to murmur, leaves rustling, the whispers gathering from every direction. The air cooled, and from somewhere deep in the grove came the first drop, 1, then 2, then 100, falling in perfect rhythm. The rain didn't pour, it spoke. It tapped against his face, his hands, the metal of his father's locket, and each sound felt like a word only his heart could translate. He didn't cry, he just smiled, a small, tired thing, like light raking through clouds. He opened his notebook, tore out the page with his father's handwriting, and pressed it into the wet soil beneath the tree. Found it, he said, the kind rain. Then he fell asleep, the rhythm lulling him deep, safe, steady. When the caretakers found him the next morning, the page was gone, melted clean into the earth. But a tiny sprout had already broken through where he'd left it. They named that sprout Pike Promise. It grew faster than any other tree in the grove, and folks said its bark shined silver when it rained. That story became a song in town, a simple melody the children would hum when the storms rolled in. Where the rain sounds kind, you'll find your peace of mind. It spread far beyond the valley. Pilots hummed it over intercoms, sailors whistled it at sea, parents sang it to restless babies. No one remembered its origin, but everyone remembered its comfort. Maybe that was the Grove real gift. It didn't need credit to keep teaching. It let its lessons wander, changing shape like clouds, always ending up where they were needed most. Years bled into centuries. The world changed again, and it always does. Machines learned patience faster than people, which was its own strange mercy. Artificial minds began studying the grove, trying to decode its rhythm. They found that the rainfall patterns formed fractals too perfect to be random tiny repetitions that mirrored the curves of tree rings, river bends, even heartbeats. They called it temporal symmetry. Some said the grove had become a living clock, keeping time not in hours but in harmony. Others said it wasn't measuring anything, it was praying. Whatever the truth, people still came. They still sat. They still waited. They still learned, slow and quiet. And the grove, patient always, gave itself to each one in turn on one rare evening when the rain fell and gold laid and the horizon glowed with the memory of 1,000 sunsets. The caretaker, an old man now, skin like carved driftwood, stood at the top of the hill and said to no one in particular, "This is what wealth was always meant to look like." He spread his arms wide, letting the rain soak through his coat, and laughed like a man who had seen too much and finally understood get enough. The valley answered him with thunder, soft and distant, like applause. That night he wrote the last entry in the balanced ledger. It ain't the gold we earn or the time we save that makes us rich. It's the peace we keep when both are gone. Then he closed the book, placed it beneath the roots of the oldest oak, and whispered, "Keep it safe, old friend." The next morning the rain stopped. The sky cleared, and in that hush the grove seemed to breathe deeper than it had before, as if taking the whole world into its lungs and exhaling contentment. It didn't mark the end of the story, just another pause, the kind that means more than any word to say. The caretaker passing came quiet at morning fog. Folks said he died sitting beneath the say oak where he'd placed the balanced ledger, his hat tilted low, his boots crossed at the ankles, a faint smile still touching his lips. The rain had come the night before, soft and measured, almost respectful, like the grove itself was whispering its goodbyes. When the townsfolk found him, there was no sorrow, just stillness. They buried him under the wide shade of that old oak and carved not his name but his last words into the stone above. Peace kept, debt settled. After that, no one took up the title of caretaker. But they figured the grove didn't need one anymore. It had outlived its keepers, its teachers, and even its own legend. The place had learned to take care of itself. The wind handled the pruning, the rain did the blessing, and the trees, old and new alike, kept their steady watch. The valley became a kind of open scripture, no ink, no pages, just life writ by time and tended by patience. Scholars called it a living archive. The elders called it the Lord balance sheet. The children, they just called it home. There was a girl among them, Mira her name was. Sharp eyes, quiet voice, the kind of stillness in her that made animals trust her. She grew up wandering those trails barefoot, collecting the fallen leaves and drying them in her mother kitchen, calling each one by the name of someone she missed. She didn't know the old stories at first, she just felt them. Sometimes, when it rained, she'd hum without realizing a low tune that matched the rhythm of the drops. Her mother said it sounded like the grove itself singing through her. One night, when she was 14, a great storm rolled over the valley, the kind that split trees and sent rivers spilling out their beds. The townsfolk stayed inside, shutters barred, praying their roofs would hold. But Mira, she slipped out barefoot into the dark. Something had pawed her, a pull deep paid roots. She followed the sound of the wind up the hill, through the lightning glare, until she reached the center of the grove. There, the rain wasn't angry, it was precise. It fell in patterns, like drum beats layered over a hidden melody. She knelt in the mud, eyes wide, and whispered, "You're talking, aren't you?" And maybe it was. Because right then, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby stump, split it clean, and left behind a hollow that glowed faint and gold from within. Mira crawled close and found something inside, a piece of weather bark shaped like an open book. The grooves in it weren't random. They formed lines, words, marks too deliberate for chance. She ran her fingers across it, reading what her heart seemed to already know. Patience is the art of hearing the future before it speaks. She took the bark home. The next day, when the rain cleared, she showed it to the townsfolk. Some said it was a miracle, others said it was nonsense. But Mira didn't argue either way. She just smiled and said, "It's a reminder." From that day on, people began coming again, not dead pilgrims or scholars, but as students. They wanted to learn, not from books, but from the rhythm itself. The grove became a school of sorts. Classes were held under the open sky, lessons written not on chalkboards, but on the ground. The teachers weren't there to speak. They were there to pause, as that was the first rule Mira made. No one teaches until the rain starts. Years passed. The girl grew into a woman wise and slow of speech. She never took the title of caretaker either, though folks called her the listener. She said she didn't own the grove, she just translated for it. Her voice carried the same calm the old cowboy once had in those first stories, rude drawl that turned silence into scripture. When visitors came, she'd guide them up the hill, stop halfway and ask, "What are you rushing toward?" Most didn't have an answer. That was all right. The grove didn't need answers. It thrived on questions that took a lifetime to finish asking. One spring afternoon, a man from the new capital came, slick hair, shiny shoes, all confidence and calculation. He said the government wanted to study the grove at ferric stability patterns. Mira just nodded. "You can study all you want," she said, "but you'll find it don't follow your clocks." He laughed politely, not understanding. They set up their machines anyway, sensors, drones, scanners, all whirring and blinking, like the grove was so patient to be examined. Then, just as they began their work, the rain came sudden and heavy. Not destructive, just enough to short every wire and drown every sound but its own. The man team scattered, cursing and covering their gear, while Mira stood still, arms crossed, smiling like someone watching a child relearn manners. When the storm passed, she turned to him and said, "Told you, just storm. Jag kan så
Yeah, maybe they passed on schedule. But you don't know reason one of his technicians returned all the quiet. He didn't bring machines, just a notebook, I think, and in the rain. Different since that day he told me, like he got something to say. She smiled, handing him a cup of tea, and then maybe finally thinks you're listening. Again, the grove had more than light. It was a compass, but not for travelers, but for the times themselves. When the world I died ran too far, they came to the grove to know how to breathe. When people forgot how to save money, love, or patience, it reminded them by example. The rain never hurried. The trees never boasted. The soil never complained. They just worked in silence, compounding peace the way bankers once counted interest. And if you stood there on any given day, you'd swear you could still hear it. The faint murmur of the old cowboy, his voice weaving through the wind and the wet, saying that same truth that started it. The world don't pay in gold, son. It pays in quiet. The years kept on drifting, same way they always did, but slower somehow.
Or the grove had a way of stretching time so you could see it better. The older folks said the valley had reached what they called the long balanced roundia season that didn't quite belong to any year. A kind of peace that sits between ages. Crops grew a little taller, storms calmed a little sooner, and the people walked softer on the earth. The rain still came regular, sometimes whispering, sometimes singing, but always sure. No one questioned it anymore. They that accepted that the grove was the valley heart, and every beat of its rain was a reminder that life don't rush what's worth keeping. By now, Mira had grown gay at the temples. Her eyes, though still sharp, had softened like candlelight behind glass. She'd taken to spending her afternoons sitting on the same bench the caretaker once carved out of fallen oak. Visitors still came, but fewer with cameras and more with quiet. They didn't want pictures anymore. They wanted stillness. And she'd give it to him, not in words, but in silence that seemed to hold answers. If they asked her how long she'd been listening, she'd just chuckle and say, long enough to stop keeping track. One day, a small child approached her, a girl no older than 8, with mud on her knees and a curiosity big enough to fill the whole valley. She looked up at Mira and asked, "Miss, how does the rain know when to come?" Mira smiled, leaned down and whispered, "The same way your heart knows when to beat. It does." The child frowned a little, thinking it over. "So it doesn't need to be told?" Mira laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. The rain don't need orders. It just remembers." That answer seemed to please the girl, though she didn't quite know why. She ran off, and Mira watched her disappear between the trees. That when she realized the grove had started its next lesson. Not for her, but for the ones coming after. It was always that way. You don't own patience. You just borrow it for your lifetime and pass it on with interest. Not long after that, a new kind of pilgrim started arriving. They weren't traders or teachers or dreamers of before. They were keepers of code people who built their wealth out of signals, data, and invisible strings stretched across the sky. I mean, they came seeking something their machines couldn't calculate: stillness. The first time Mira saw their drones hovering over the treetops, she felt that old worry in her chest. The grove don't take kindly to being watched, she muttered. But she didn't send them away. Instead, she invited their leader, a young woman named Aila, down for tea. Aila was polite, though her eyes kept flicking back to the forest like a scientist staring at a riddle. She said her people were building what they thought a temporal network, something that could help predict climate rhythms across the planet. "We believe your grove holds the last natural algorithm," she explained. "It could teach us how to bring balance back." Mira just nodded slow, letting her finish. When Aila was done, she poured another cup of tea and said, "You can't digitize patience, darling. It don't fit on a screen." But Aila was not one to quit easy. She spent 3 days up on that hill, sitting in the grove with her instruments, recording rainfall, root vibrations, humidity shifts. By the 3rd night, she turned off her devices. They'd all malfunctioned anyway. The rain had gotten inside, shortening every circuit live because it was defending its secrets. So Aila just sat there. No beeps, no scans, just the steady pulse of the storm. By dawn, she looked different. Not defeated, humble. She went back to Mira, eyes rimmed red but shining all the same. "You're right," she said quietly. "It not data, it devotion." Mira grinned. "Now you're speaking the language." Before Aila left, she handed her a small wooden token carved in the shape of a raindrop. "Keep this," she said. "When the noise gets too loud, hold it. It'll remind you of the rhythm you forgot." Aila promised she would, and she did. Years later, she built her network, but not to predict the future. She built it to listen, and through it, she broadcasted the sound of the grove rain across the world. Cities that hadn't heard quiet in generations began to fall asleep to that rhythm. For the first time in centuries, people rested without guilt. Some called it the rain wave, others called it salvation. Mira called it the grove going global. She didn't live long enough to see it spread to every corner of the world, but she saw enough. One evening the sun bled through the clouds and the rain shimmered gold. She sat on her bench and whispered to the air, "You did it, old friend. You taught 'em the trees," rustled in reply. A sound of laughter through leaves. She closed her eyes and let the rain kiss her skin one last time. By morning, the bench was empty, her footprints already half washed away. The townsfolk didn't mourn her either. They planted a small sapling wedge she used to sit and left it unmarked. No names, no stone, just a tree, same May the 1st. And when the rain fell, it bent around that sapling, never hidden too hard, never too soft. The rhythm found her again, folding her into the song she'd spent her whole life listening to. From then on, people who came to the grove said the air felt thicker there, not heavy but full, like it carried every word, every lesson, every drop that had fell since the first one. Some claimed that when the storm rolled in and you sat quiet enough, you could hear a woman's voice between the rain beats, whispering soft and sure, "Wait well. And if you do, you'll find the same peace every soul before you did. The kind that don't fade, don't fear, don't fail, the kind that grows deep, he roots and gentle as rain. They say the sapling planted for Mira grew faster than any that is seen. Within a handful of years, it stretched high enough that its crown caught the morning light before any other tree in the grove. The townsfolk called it the listener oak, though it wasn't like the others. It shimmered differently when the rain came, its bark glistening silver like moonlight trying to hide in daylight. Some said that when you touched it, you could feel a faint hum, soft as a heartbeat. Others said it was Mira herself, still listening, still waiting. Whatever it was, nobody doubted that the grove had changed again. The rain had taken on a new sound, lower, warmer, almost like a song humming through stone and soil alike, a hymn without words. The world beyond the valley had grown restless again. Hey, it always does. The machines had learned to think faster than men, but not wiser. Cities gleamed brighter but burned out sooner. People could talk to each other across the stars, but forgot how to look one another in the eye. Even so, they still remembered the sound of the rain. The rain wave that Ayla built kept spreading, flowing through every home, every sleep, every restless night. It became more than a broadcast. It became medicine. Hospitals piped it into their halls to calm the sick. Schools played it before exams to quiet ain'ts' hearts. Some even built entire temples that used nothing but the rhythm of falling water and worship. They called themselves the Order of the Drop. They wore no robes, took no vows, and built no altars. Their church was sound. Every sunrise, they bathed in silence to listen. At first, it was just a handful of people, a widow, a student, a farmer, a man who'd lost too much to noise. But within years, their gatherings stretched across continents. The rain became not just a teacher, but a language. And through it, the world started remembering the old truth again. Patience wasn't weakness, it was mastery. The richest wealth was stillness earned slow. Back in the valley, the grove thrived. The roots of the listener oak had reached the resting place of the balanced ledger, and some swore that on clear nights you could see faint veins of light moving beneath the soil, like knowledge circulating through the earth. The rain glowed too, just barely, enough to make the drops look like embers falling upward instead of down. It didn't frighten anyone. It comforted Anne. The caretakers, what few still tended the paths, said the grove was just evolving, same that everything alive does. Maybe learning how to pray louder, one of Anne said with a grin. Then came the year of silence, a dry spell unlike any before. The clouds stopped coming, the sky turned white with heat, and the air grew sharp, brittle. Crops failed in half the towns across the Hun. Rivers shrank to threads of dust. Even the grove, always green, always steady, began to wilt at the edges. For the first time in centuries, the rain ledger went unread. The hum beneath the soil faded to nothing.
Folks came from all over, kneeling in the dirt, praying for the storm to return, but the sky stayed still. Days stretched to weeks, weeks to months.
The silence was heavier than any thunder. Then one night, under a moon so pale it looked tired, a small boy wandered into the grove. He was no older than 10, skin burnt by sun and eyes dim from hunger. He carried a single cup of water, what was left from his family well. He knelt beneath the listener oak and poured the water at its base. "You gave my grandgar rain," he whispered, voice cracking. "You can take mine." He sat there, waiting small shoulders straight, watching the parched soil soak up every drop. Hours passed, the stars drifted, but he didn't move. When morning came, the townsfolk found him asleep at the foot of the oak, dusted with dew, and right above him the first cloud in nearly a year. By noon, the sky was black with thunder. The first raindrop fell and sizzled against the dry dirt, raising steam or smoke from an altar. Then came another, then thousands.
The grove drank deep, roots groaning, branches trembling, fine of remembering what living felt they. The people below wept in the streets, holding out their hands to catch the miracle. That night, lightning struck the listener oak, dead center, but it didn't split, it shone. The whole tree lit up like a lantern, every vein of its bark glowing white. The thunder cracked once, loud day creation, then faded. When the light died down, the rain fell steady again, calm, clear, eternal. The drought was over. The boy grew into a man named Eli Voss. He never left the valley. Said the world outside moved too far for his bones. He became the quiet guardian of the grove, though he never called himself caretaker. The grove don't need watching, he'd tell travelers, just someone to keep time with it. He kept the same small cup he'd poured down a boy, now tarnished and bent, sitting on a stone near the tree roots. When asked why he'd never polish it, he'd smile and say, "Patience shines on its own." And though he aged, the grove never did again. The rain returned to its rhythm, softer, wiser, like it remembered what it almost lost. The trees grew wider, their branches interlocking into a canopy so dense that sunlight came down owning slivers, but the air beneath it was sweet and cool, a kind of peace that soaked through your skin. Pilgrims still came, leaving coins, letters, rings, even broken phones, relics of noise abandoned at the altar of quiet. And the rain took it in, wearing each offering down to dust, returning everything to balance. Eli once said to a visitor, "Funny thing about rain, it don't then keep what it gives, just carries it when it needed." The traveler nodded, understanding too late that how the grove had lived all these centuries, not by owning or protecting, but by giving. The patience it taught wasn't lesson, it was a life. And somewhere in that endless rhythm, the voice of the old cowboy still lingered, low and calm as thunder far away. "We will start dry, son. But if you wait long enough, even the dust learns to bloom." Years rolled on the way they always do when nobody watching the clock. The grove never lost its rhythm again after Eli time, but the people did.
That the way of things peace makes folks forget what it cost. The world outside got louder once more, building higher, moving faster, selling everything that could fit in the window, but in the valley the rain kept speaking its same soft sermon, pouring down over bark and stone, over graves and growth alike. And the few who still came to listen, they knew it wasn't about the grove anymore, it was about what the grove had taught. Eli passed one autumn evening with his hands folded over that same little tin cup, the one that had saved the valley all those years ago. They buried him under the listener oak, no marker again, just a circle of river stones arranged by children who'd followed his quiet lessons. The morning after his burial, the rain came steady, slow, with no thunder at all. It was like the sky knew this one didn't need an announcement. After him came no chosen keeper, just stories. The town began to fade too, as folks left for brighter horizons and bigger promises. The paths that once wound to the grove got swallowed by wild grass, and the sound of the rain became something only travelers spoke of.
The few who stayed didn't guard it, they lived with it. A farmer who worked his fields barefoot, saying it helped him hear the ground better. A widow who spent every dusk sitting by the oak, humming to herself till the first drops fell. They didn't preach the legend, they breathed it. Then came a time of machines so quiet they made noise obsolete. Artificial rain fell from clouds that weren't real. The city folk said it was progress, clean, predictable, programmable. But somehow, the crops didn't taste the same. The flowers didn't bloom right. People slept, but they didn't rest. That when they remembered the old sound. Someone found a copy of the rain wave crackling, distorted, but still carrying that ancient pulse. They played it over their speakers, and for a brief second, whole neighborhoods fell silent. Children looked up, old men closed their eyes. It was the sound of the real thing, unperfected, alive. Folks started searching for the valley again. The road had long vanished, but the grove was still there, waiting. The listener oak had grown monstrous, its trunk wide enough to hide a house, its roots tangled through the earth like veins of bronze. And beneath it the ground glowed faintly when it rained, pulsing with the same rhythm that had once kept time with human hearts. The first wanderers who reached it said they could feel something shift inside them, a sort of quiet so deep it scared them. Some cried, some laughed, and some knelt without knowing why. The rain didn't speak words anymore, it didn't need to, it did reminded. Among those who came was a man named Corin, no preacher, no farmer, but a drifter with a face carved by two made sleep-late years. He'd spent his life in glass towers, trading air for digits, until he realized he'd forgotten what anything smelled like. He found an old journal talking about the rain ledger and figured it was myth, but when the noise of the world got too heavy, he followed its whispers west to the grove. When he arrived, he found no signs, no temples, no guide, just rain and silence. He stood there, coat dripping, staring up at the oak until his knees gave out. He didn't pray, he just listened. Days passed, he stayed, slept in the hollow of old trunk, drank from puddles, ate what grew. The grove didn't feed him with fruit, it fed him with quiet. And one night, when the moon cut through the clouds, did enough to paint the world silver, Corinne heard a voice. Not loud, not near, just clear enough to be real. You can't fix time, it said. You can only walk slower through it. He didn't answer, just nodded, like someone receiving an order he'd already known was coming. When he finally left, he didn't go back to the towers. He traveled from town to town, teaching people how to hear the rain again. He carried a small wooden bowl carved from fallen oak, and wherever he stayed, he set it out to collect water. He called it balance. Drink from it, he'd tell the weary, and remember what stillness tastes like. Some laughed, some didn't, but every once in a while, one of them would drink and go quiet like something old had woken up inside. Years later, when Corinne died, they said the bowl was found dry beside him. But when they lifted it, the bottom was damp, like it had just been emptied by the sky itself. No one took it. They left it there, same way they'd done for Mira, for Eli, for the cowboy before them. The grove don't take to memorials, it is one. It holds every name that fed spoke in patience, and every silence that fed held a truth. And maybe that's how wealth reworks. Not coins, not gold, not ledgers or markets. It's the inheritance of quiet. Every time someone listens to the rain without wanting to own it, the balance grows. Every time a restless soul learns to sit still, the grove expands, whether it in that valley or in their own chests. It compound interest written in water, paid out in peace. They say if you go there now on a night without moon or wind and stand long enough beneath that silver oak, the rain will start without clouds. It'll fall warm and even, like the earth remembering mercy. And if you close your eyes, you'll hear not one, but many voices humming through the storm. The cowboy, the caretaker, Mira, Eli, Corinne, all speaking the same line in 100 accents, old and new. The rain don't belong to no one. It just teaches us what belonging means, and then the storm fades. The grove sighs, the balance resets once again. Long after Corin Bowl was left behind and the valley had gone quiet again, the grove turned into a kind of legend that flickered between the real and the half-remembered. The world outside, hungry for stories it could sell, tried to bottle it, tried to name it, map it, even own it. Some built retreats taught the quiet balance, charged a small fortune for a week worth of meditation under artificial rainfall. Some made documentaries showing blurred drone shots of forests they claimed were the grove, selling vinyl records of authentic rainfall recordings for the city crowds who needed proof of stillness. But the real grove, she never allowed herself to be captured. Every time they tried to locate it, the coordinates changed. The valley shifted, sliding across maps like a ghost that refused to sit still. You could only find her by accident, and only if you didn't mean to. There were whispers that the grove wasn't a place anymore, but a condition. Some said it had gone inward, taken root in people instead of soil. The patient ones, the quiet ones, the few who still looked at life like something to be tended, not conquered, they carried pieces of it in their bones. The rain might fall on every roof, but the real rhythm, the one that balanced men's hearts, that was rarer than silver. One winter, when the cities grew loud enough to drown even their own storms, a woman named Ruth came wandering from the south. She wasn't a pilgrim, at least not in the way the old tales meant. She was a widow, 60 years old, walking because she couldn't bear sitting still after her husband's death.
All she had was a threadbare coat, a small tin of coins, and a notebook full of debts she'd written to herself, things she owed her younger self but never paid back. Learn patience, forgive, sleep without guilt. She'd heard about the grove once, in a story her husband told by lamplight, a whisper about a rain that healed without preaching. She figured it couldn't be real, but grief will make a believer out of anyone. So she walked north, following not roads but rumors, campfire directions, half-forgotten maps drawn on napkins.
Took her 3 months to find the valley, though truth be told, it found her. The sky opened above her like a secret unfolded. The air grew thick, sweet with the smell of wet bark and memory. She stopped walking, not because she was tired, but because the stillness around her made every step feel loud. The first raindrop landed on her cheek, slid down into the corner of her mouth, and it tasted alive. That when she knew she'd made it. She sat under a tree that might have been the listener oak or one of its descendants. It didn't matter anymore, and she waited. Hours, maybe days. The sound of rain did what no preacher, no doctor, no bottle had did. It gave her permission to stop. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw something glinting in the mud. Half-buried, old but whole. Wooden, smooth from age, rimmed with what looked like silver moss. Corin bowl, though she didn't know his name, she picked it up, washed it in rainwater, and felt the warmth spread through her fingers. It wasn't magic, it was memory, like the hands of everyone who'd held it were still there, steady in hers. She took that bowl back to her small home by the rail tracks and filled it with rain every night. She never sold it, never showed it off, just drank from it before sleep and whispered thank you. It said that her grandchildren grew up hearing those stories, learning that wealth was not what you owned, but what you carried. Quietly, one of them, a boy named Jonah, grew up to become a teacher, not of numbers, not of finance, but of stillness. He'd start every class with the same line, every sound teaches if you let it. When his students asked him where'd he learned that, he'd smile and tell them, from the rain my grandmother drank. So Jonah became the bridge between old world and new. He wrote a book, The Patience Ledger, filled with stories about the grove, about balance, about the cost of speed. He didn't preach it like a prophet. He spoke like a man sitting by a campfire, sharing coffee with strangers. The world didn't know what to do with that kind of calm. Some thought him foolish, some thought him profound, but the book spread, not fast, just steady, like a tide you don't notice till it halfway up your boots. People started slowing down. Markets quieted. Investors began speaking of timelines longer than lifetimes. That old idea, compounding patience, found its way back into the heart of progress. And through all that noise, through the revival and the forgetting, the grove remained. No map would hold it, but it never vanished either. It existed wherever a man or woman sat with their palms open to the rain, remembering that their wealth don't fit in ledgers. It lived in every quiet apology, every long wait that bore fruit, every tear that fell without regret. There are those who still go looking for it, though. Young wanderers clamoring in, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fabled silver oak. Most come back saying they found nothing but a few, always the same kind. The patient ones come back changed. They don't talk much. They don't post pictures. They just start living slower, working gentle, and spending their time like it matters more than their money. You can tell who they are by the way they look at storms. Not afraid, not hurried, just watchful, like they're reading a message the rest of us forgot how to translate. Every once in a while, in faraway place, someone reports a peculiar rain, one that falls steady without clouds, one that glows faintly gold for a heartbeat before turning clear. Scientists say it reflection or dust or luck, but the quiet ones know better. They say at the grove, remembering us again, testing to see if we still remember it back. The rain still keeps its balanced ledger. And if you listen long enough, you stand still and let the storm wash over your debts, your noise, your hurry. You might hear the old cowboy humming through the thunder, his voice rolling low to the earth itself. The richest man ain't the one who owns the rain, it's the one who waits to feel it. They're a story the locals still tell, though most don't realize they're telling it. It sneaks into the way they pause before speaking, the way they let a silence hang instead of rushing to fill it. They say the rain, the real rain, the kind that smells like soil, remembering how to breathe, never truly stopped. It just chose way to fall. Not on noise, not on want, but on stillness. Some claim they've seen it fought a single traveler for miles, a ribbon of drizzle hanging over his shoulders while the rest of the world stayed dry. They call it the rain that follows the patient. One such traveler was a woman named Elsie Hart, an accountant who'd spent most of her life calculating other folks' futures while losing sight of her own. Her world was spreadsheets, deadlines, a clock that ticked louder than her thoughts. When her firm merged and she was retired early, she didn't fight. It just packed her few things and went west toward a quiet she couldn't yet define. Somewhere past the cities, the highways thinned, the billboards disappeared, and the static in her chest started to loosen. That when the rain found her, it wasn't a storm, just a light drizzle, persistent and memory. It didn't soak her, didn't chill her, it just stayed. Followed her from morning to dusk, from plains to hill. She tried waiting it out under bridges, tried shaking it off her coat, but it clung gentle, never pushy, like a friend keeping pace. After 3 days, she stopped fighting it. Fine, she muttered, laughing to herself, you can come along. And the rain answered with a sealed drop that landed right on her palm. As if to say, good. By the 6th day, she found the valley. Not because she was looking, but because she'd run out of reasons to go anywhere else. The air changed the way a man's heartbeat does before confession. She knew she'd crossed into something old, something waiting. The grove stood quiet, though the rain that had followed her now spread out, feeding roots that hadn't seen a drop in seasons. The listener oak, tall and silver, many-like caught in time, leaned so slightly her way, its branches heavy with stories. Elsie stood there, soaked in awe, and whispered, I've balanced every book but my own. The grove didn't speak. It just let the rain fall harder, thick enough that the ground began to hum. She sat down right there in the mud, shoes ruined, and pulled from her coat a tiny leather ledger she'd used her whole career. Inside were neat columns of numbers debts repaid, credits earned, a life measured in precision. She tore a page from the back and wrote just one line, forgive yourself for rushing, then folded it and buried it at the base of the oak. The next morning, the rain stopped. The sun broke through soft and amber, and the grove smelled like redemption. Elsie stayed 3 days more, then walked back out of that valley a different kind of rich. When she returned to town, she opened a little shop, didn't sell a thing, just gave folks time. Folks come in expecting a service, but she'd dip pour tea, sit him down and say, what the hurry work to you? Word spread. Soon enough, that small shop became a gathering place. People came not for advice, but to practice breathing. She shouted the balance room. There were no ledgers, no clocks, just a slow kettle, 2 chairs, and rain sounds playing soft in the back, recorded on an old tape she claimed came from her walk west. Years later, when Elsie passed, the townsfolk found the tape still humming, even though it had never been rewound, never plugged in. It was said that whenever storms veered over the town, that same rhythm echoed faintly in the thunder. Like the grove itself was thanking her for keeping the lesson alive. That was how it went on. No temples, no saints, just simple folks learning to move with the rhythm, to hold their peace like coin. The rain ledger didn't end, it just spread out in small, invisible dividends. A father teaching his daughter to wait for the bread to rise instead of buying it rushed. A young man letting his anger cool but speaking. A tired nurse taking a deep breath before lifting another patient. The world turned slower but better. And sometimes on nights when the sky felt too wide and the wind carried the smell of wet cedar, people would gather around fires or sit by window panes and tell stories of the grove that never died. No one knew where it truly was anymore. Some said it vanished into the earth, others that it was buried beneath the sea. But those who'd heard the rain in the right kind of silence swore they could feel it, an invisible weight behind their ribs, keeping time with their hearts. Every generation added a new line to the story, but the ending never changed. The cowboy words lived on, passed from tongue to tongue, worn smooth like a prayer stone in a pocket. Parents whispered it to restless children, teachers wrote it on chalkboards, lovers carved it into bark. The rain don't belong to no one. It teaches us what belonging means, and maybe that's the secret the grove tried to leave behind. That every life is a ledger, every breath a balance, every kindness an entry that earns interest and's in quiet place we can't yet see. Maybe the true wealth ain't in keeping what's yours, but in learning to let the rain fall through your open hands, trusting it'll find its way when it needed most. If you listen close enough, you can still hear it, that long, low hum of the storm, patient and eternal, waiting for the next wanderer to step off the road, to stop chasing what shines and start remembering what breathes. And when that moment comes, when they stand still under open sky and feel the first drop slide down their cheek, they'll know the truth that every soul in this story had to learn the slow way. You can't own peace. You can only walk steady enough for it to follow. Long after Elsie Balance Room faded into the soft pages of memory, Folks said the rain had taken to wandering again, searching for new listeners. It didn't always fall from clouds anymore. Sometimes it showed up in the shape of a quiet thought before sleep, or the rhythm of boots walking down a long road with no hurry in them. The grove had become less a place and more a pattern, something that showed up wherever patience dared to take root. And every time a man or woman learned to trade want for waiting, that old rhythm would stir again somewhere unseen, a ledger mark written in water. The world had changed more than anyone could have dreamed. There were towers that reached the clouds, machines that could think faster than the people who built them, and markets that never slept. Yet for all the noise, there was a quiet rebellion brewing, a slow movement of those who'd had enough of speed. They called themselves the Rain Traders. Not a sect, not a church, just souls who believed stillness had value, that silence could be spent like gold if handled with respect. Each member carried a single coin, not minted, not numbered, that forged from melted storm metal, lightning-struck iron that shimmered faint under moonlight. On one side was a drop of rain, and on the other a simple engraving. Wait. Well, that was their creed. They'd meet at dusk in open fields, rooftops, or under flickering neon signs, sitting cross-legged and quiet for an hour straight. No talking, no teaching, just listening to wind, to footsteps, to the steady tick of their own heartbeats. They said that for each quiet hour they gave, the world calmed itself a little more. There was one among them, drifter named Saul Granger, who never claimed leadership, but always seemed to end in the middle of things. He was built like a man, carved out of old oak, with eyes that had seen too much and found peace anyway. He'd been a broker once, back when money was measured by how loud it could scream. But after a market crash that cost him everything, he walked away, not out of shame, out of exhaustion. He said he wanted to trade in the only market that never closed, patience. Saul became a kind of myth himself. He carried an umbrella that had huts in it, said he liked the feel of honest rain, never stayed anywhere long, but always left something behind, a saying, a coin, or silence that lingered on after his boots moved on. People said the rain followed him like it once did Elsie. Some swore they saw storms bend around his path, the clouds parting that enough to keep him dry when he didn't want to be wet, or soaking him through when he needed reminding. Whatever truth there was to it, he never confirmed it. That ain't my rain to talk about, he'd say, eyes smiling. One winter he found himself in a town half dead from drought. The riverbed was cracked like old porcelain, the crops brittle ghosts in the dirt. The people there had stopped looking at the sky. They didn't trust it anymore. Saul arrived on foot, boots dusted in miles of silence. The locals eyed him warily, whispering that he was another fool wandering through hopeless land. Ate his smile, bought a loaf of bread with one of his strange coins, and sat himself down in the square. Then, without a word, he opened his hole-riddled umbrella and just waited. Hours passed. The sun beat down cruel. The children laughed at him first, then lost interest. The grown folk went back to complaining about the government, the sky, fate, whatever kept him busy. But Saul didn't move. He stayed till the lake began to dim and the horizon burned to gold, that when a little girl came up and asked, "Mister, why are you sitting there with the umbrella if it ain't raining?" Saul looked at her, slow and kind. Because if nobody waits for it, sweetheart, why would it bother coming back? The next day, more folks joined him. A farmer with cracked hands, a mother with tired eyes, then a preacher, a shopkeep, a few children. By sunset, half the town was sitting under the open sky, umbrellas out, every one of them waiting. And just then the night fell quiet. A sound rose from far off, the low roll of thunder. One drop fell, then another, then out at once. The rain came hard and honest, pounded the dry dust into life again. The people shouted, laughed, cried. Saul just leaned back, eyes closed, whispering that the market paying its dues. When the storm ended, he left. No one saw him go, but in the square where he'd sat, they found his umbrella leaning against a post, its fabric torn but glistening with rain that refused to dry. The townsfolk hung it there, calling it the patient shade. Years later, when the town built a new well, they carved 4 words above it, because somebody waited first. That was the thing about the rain ledger. It kept collecting interest long after its authors were gone. Patience, once planted, never truly died. It just traveled. You could trace its fingerprints across every act of quiet mercy in the world. A nurse holding a trembling hand without rushing, a stranger letting another go first in line, a craftsman taking the extra hour to make something last instead of cheap. Each of those moments was a drop in the same rain, falling through generations. And somewhere out there, beneath skies that forget nothing, that grove still hums. It might be a field now, or a ridge, or just an idea waiting for new roots. But when the thunder grumbles low and the smell of wet earth rolls through the air, you can bet your soul at remembering the names Mira, Eli, Corin, Elsie, Saul, and all the quiet hands that balance the world one slow breath at a time. And maybe, if you stand still enough, the rain will tap you on the shoulder, asking the same question it asked since the first storm met the first seed. What will you wait for? In the centuries that followed Saul passing, the world changed its clothes again. New lights, new gods, new names for old hungers. Yet beneath all that shimmer and hum, the rhythm stayed the same. You could hear it if you listened in the right kind of silence, like a faint heart still beating beneath the noise. The rain ledger had turned from a story into a law of nature, one the world couldn't shake even if it tried. And the rain, Lord, the rain, it remembered everything. There came a time they called the Great Brightness. The sky was filled with satellites and sun mirrors, the clouds controlled by hands far above the soil. Rain was rationed, sold by the leader, purified till it had no memory left. The rich bought their own weather, and the poor prayed to air that never answered. But every now and then, the machines would glitch. The sky would forget its schedule, and water would fall without command. Those moments became miracles. People dropped what they were doing, lifting their faces to the unprogrammed rain. Mouths open like children remember in wonder. In one such city, a steel jungle that used to be desert, a young man named Tobias worked in a maintenance tech for the climate grids. His job was to keep the rain predictable. He was good at it too, efficient, quick. His world was made of graphs and control panels, each droplet calculated before it had fell. But late one night, when he was recalibrating a moisture node near the city edge, he noticed something strange. The sensors were picking up rainfall readings outside the grid boundary. Impossible. Unauthorized precipitation. He climbed the access tower to check, and there it was, beyond the reach of any machine, a small patch of honest rain falling slow and steady over an old, forgotten valley. He should have reported it. Protocol demanded it. But instead, Tobias shut off his radio, climbed down, and started walking. It took him half a day to reach it. The moment his boots crossed into that ungoverned downpour, the air changed. It smelled like age, like stories. He walked till he reached the heart of it, where the rain fell thick, and there, half swallowed by vines and time, stood what might have once been a tree, or rode the ghost of one. The trunk shimmered faintly, its bark smooth veined stone, carved with lines that weren't letters but grooves of rhythm. He touched it, and the world went quiet. A voice, not from the tree, but from somewhere deeper, spoke through the rain. You keep the sky in cages now. Tobias froze. His mouth went dry. Who there? He whispered. The one who waited first came the reply. It wasn't angry, just sad. You've forgotten that rain don't obey. It listens. He stayed there till the downpour slowed to mist. When it ended, he knelt and dug in the wet soil that the tree roots had split the ground. His fingers found metal. He pulled up a small disc, circular, tarnished, engraved with a drop on one side and words on the other. Wait. Well, Saul coin, though the man had been gone for generations. Tobias turned it over in his hand, heart hammering, feeling a warmth rise through his chest that no machine could explain. For the first time in his life, he let the rain soak him through. No coat, no umbrella, just him and the sky, eye to eye. He quit his job the next morning, walked away from the towers, the panels, the pulse of the programmed world. Started teaching not from books, but from patience. He built small gardens in the cracks of the city where no one bothered to look, waiting for real rain to find him. At first, people mocked him. The clouds don't fall here, they said. The system won't allow it. Tobias just smiled and kept planting. And one day, as the city lights dimmed from maintenance, a single droplet hit his cheek, then another, then hundreds. The unlicensed storm spread across the skyline, falling only where his gardens had grown. By dawn, Green had crept up through the concrete, soft and unafraid. The government tried to trace the anomaly, but every record came up blank. The rainfall didn't register on their data feeds. It simply refused to exist inside their numbers. That when the people started whispering bid, the rain traders were back, the grove had woken, and the sky, long captive, was remembering its freedom. From there, it moved faster than anyone expected. Cities began losing control of their weather. Not catastrophes, just unpredictability. Rain that arrived early, left late, soaked only certain neighborhoods. They faded the balanced drift. Scientists couldn't explain it. Economists couldn't price it. But the people who listened, really listened, knew what it meant. The world was settling its accounts again. The rain ledger had opened one last page. Tobias lived long enough to see the movement spread. He grew gray in the service of waiting, teaching new generations that time, not wealth, was the rarest resource of. When he died, they buried him under one of his gardens. The rain fell that day. Gentle lay his breath. Someone placed saw coin on the mound, then another beside it, then another. By nightfall, there was a circle of silver droplets shimmering in the wet dirt. They said the storm didn't stop for 3 days, not because it needed to, but because it wanted to. Now, whenever a child asks why it rains when it shouldn't, or why thunder rumbles long after lightning gone, the old folks smile and tell this scentless child, like the world remembering her patience, and maybe that will always grow. Bought it for us to recall that everything good takes its time. A seed don't rush, a storm don't beg, a life don't profit from hurry. The richest balance isn't in numbers, it in breaths, and the rain, bless it, keeps count. It don't need your belief, just your stillness. So if one night you wake to a storm that sounds familiar, soft, steady, older than language, don't hide from it. Step outside, lift your face to the water and whisper back to the sky. Slow and honest, death settled. Long after Tobias' guides were swallowed by green and glass alike, the world grew quieter again, but not from peace. It was the silence of overstimulation, the hum of too much progress drowning itself out. The people had built their empires to reach the stars, to sip light straight from the sun, to store time in batteries, but they'd forgotten the sound of now. The air was always too filtered, the light too clean, the days too measured. Nobody noted when the birds stopped singing. Nobody noted when their shadows started moving slower than they did. The rain had pulled back, watching from afar, waiting to see if anyone still remembered the old rhythm. It was in that strange, still world that a young girl named May was born. She grew up in one of those sky towns, a place where clouds were property and sunlight had a subscription. Her parents were engineers, fixing the weather grids Tobias had once helped dismantle, though they didn't know it. To May, rain was just a file on a console, a sound she could play, not feel. But sometimes, when the lights dimmed and her mother read her stories, May would close her eyes and imagine what rain felt like. Cold, warm, heavy, soft, she never knew, but she always dreamed about it. When she turned 12, her family took a trip down to the surface, a rare thing, expensive and forbidden. The cities below were ruins now, forests reclaiming towers, rivers twisting through metal bones. They landed near what was once a great capital, now wrapped in ivy. May wandered off while her parents set up camp, drawn by a faint sound she couldn't place. It wasn't static, wasn't wind, it was a heartbeat, slow and deep, coming from the ground. She followed it, step by step, till she reached a wide clearing where the air shimmered like it was remembering something. And then, without clouds, without warning, the rain came. Not heavy, not violent, just enough to cover her hair, her hands, her face. She froze, mouth open, staring at the sky that had forgotten how to do this. It was warm, alive in a way that no simulation had managed. She laughed, then cried, then just stood there, arms out, letting the rhythm find her. It didn't soak her, it spoke to her. She didn't hear words, not exactly, but she understood all the same. A welcome, a return. And then, when she looked down, she saw something glinting in the puddle by her boots, a coin.
It wasn't shiny, not anymore. Tarnished, edges worn smooth.
On one side, a drop. On the other, 2 twos. Wait, well, May picked it up, and in that moment the rain stopped. The forest stilled. Everything in her life that had been noise went silent. She didn't understand why she'd been chosen, if that what this was, but she knew she couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. She slipped the coin into her pocket and went back to camp, saying nothing. That night, while her parents slept, she dreamed of a great silver tree stretching across the sky, its roots touching oceans, its leaves humming in the wind. At the base of it sat a figure, a man with a hat tipped low, boots crossed, humming to himself. The old cowboy, same as if he didn't speak, just nodded at her like he'd been expecting her all along. And when she tried to step close, the rain began again, not from above, but from within. She woke up crying, heart racing, coin warm against her palm. In the years that followed, May became what some might have called a heretic. She studied the old world systems, finance, weather, agriculture, and found the same flaw in all of them: too much control, not enough faith. You can't balance a world that don't breathe, she told her teachers. Every equation needs room for rain. They expelled her for it, said she'd lost her sense of logic. But logic never grew a seed. She left the sky sit behind, traveling across the ruins, following rumors of old forests that still whispered during storms. She wasn't trying to bring the grove back, she was trying to remember what it meant. And she did. Not in one place, but in many. A dry field that bloomed overnight after she buried the coin in its heart. A desert that found shade when she hummed the old rhythm under her breath. A fisherman who claimed the sea itself calmed when she sat by the shore. Wherever she went, the balance followed. Not miracles, not spectacle, just rightness.
Like the world was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Eventually she reached a valley none had mapped, hidden between 2 mountains that curved like a pair of old folded hands. There, she found what remained of the grove. Not lush, not bright, just quiet. Trees older than history, their bark etched with grooves like pages from forgotten ledgers. She knelt beneath one and whispered, "You've been waiting for me."
The wind stirred, slow and kind. Then came a single drop, falling straight onto her forehead, rolling down her nose like a tear. It was answer enough. May stayed there till her hair turned silver, tending the soil, planting new seeds, teaching those who found her the same truth every soul in the ledger had come to know. The rain don't fall to save, it falls to remind, to balance, to begin again. She never taught herself a prophet, never wrote her name on stone, but when she died, the storm that came after lasted for 7 days straight. No thunder, no wind, just a patient downpour that spread from that valley across the world, filling every crack, every thirst, every silence. And when it ended, the clouds cleared, revealing a new tree growing in the grove's center, its bark smooth, silver, roots tangled around a small, rusted coin, the last of its kind, or the first. They say if you stand under that tree now, close your eyes and listen long enough, you'll hear her voice, uncertain, speaking to the rhythm of the rain. The balance don't end, it just changes hands, and somewhere in the thunder that follows, low and far and warm, the fire breath, the old cowboy hums his agreement. After May passing, the valley didn't mourn, it breathed. The trees swayed like they were stretching after a long rest, and the soil shimmered faintly in the dawn. That silver tree, the one that grew from her last coin, became a kind of compass. It didn't point north or south, it pointed inward. Pilgrims who came there said that when they stood close enough, they could feel their heartbeats sink to the sound of water moving underground, like the earth itself had learned her rhythm. No one called it a miracle, they called it justice.
The rain spread from that valley for years, reaching places that had forgotten how to soften. Cities that once bottled the sky learned to leave a little room for wonder. The people who lived through it began marking their ledgers differently, no longer by profit and loss, but by what they called quiet gains. A man who waited an extra day before speaking harshly was richer for it. A mother who sat through her child's storm without raising her voice earned more peace than gold goodbye. The more they waited, the more it rained. Balance beget balance, same as it always had. In time, the stories of the grove turned to scripture. Not the kind bound in leather and read in temples, but the kind told in kitchens and on porches under skies that threatened to rain but hadn't yet decided. The tales shifted like weather, but they all ended the same way, with a storm that came right when it was needed most. They thought it the patient promise. The belief that if you gave the world enough stillness, it would answer back in water. Some thought that superstition, some called it faith.
But to those who lived it, it was just good arithmetic. You can't rush compounding peace. January passed, and the silver tree grew tall enough to pierce the low clouds. Its roots dug deep into forgotten bones of the old caretakers, Mira, Eli, Corin, Elsie, Saul, Tobias, May, all weaved together in one endless ledger beneath the earth. Travelers came from far countries not to worship but to learn. There was a school built near the edge of the valley, not of books, but of waiting, they thought it. The House of Slow Water. Its lessons were simple but merciless. You rise with the first drop. You work with your breath, not your clock. You speak only after the rain stops, and you leave richer than you arrived, whether or not you earn a single coin. People who graduated from that place didn't become leaders or kings, they became listeners. The world started hiring them for what they called patience consultant, though that title never fit right. What they really did was sit in boardrooms or fields, looking men in suits square in the eye and saying things like, "You're building too fast," or "You've forgotten the rain half of this deal." At first folks laughed, then they made their profits last longer when they listened. The ledger influence reached places even the Grove hadn't dreamed of. But every balance has its shadow. There were those who tried to patent patience to monetize quiet. They cited the stillness industry. You could buy bottled rain scent, subscribe to streams of thunder mixed with algorithmic peace. And while the noise dressed itself at calm, the true rhythm began to slip away again. It always that way man builds walls round his blessings till he can charge rent on them. The Grove watched and waited, same it always did. It didn't fight back, it didn't fade, waited. Then, one season, a drought came again, not from the sky, but from the soul. People still had rain on command, but it didn't feel right. The water fell clear, yet left no scent. It fed the crops, but not the hearts. No one could explain it, though the old ones whispered, the rain tired of not being believed, that when a child small to sprout, not this stubborn, came wandering into the valley.
Her name was Lark. She had hair the color of sunrise and eyes too big for her face. She'd never heard of the Grove, but she followed the sound of silence till it led her there. When she reached the silver tree, she didn't ask for rain, she didn't pray. She just sat and started humming. Off-key at first, then steadier. It wasn't a tune anyone recognized, but it had the same pulse as thunder rolling far off. The tree swayed and the clouds above began to gather. She kept humming unbothered, even when drops began to fall. Her hum turned into words that made no sense at all but carried truth anyway, half lullaby, half sermon. Rain don't beg to fall, just remembers how. By dusk, the whole valley was crying sky again, real rain, old rain, the kind that makes the world smell alive.
People came running, drawn by instinct more than belief, and they saw the girl sitting there, palms open, laughing through the downpour. "How'd you do it?" they asked her. Awed, she just shrugged. "I didn't. It was just waiting for someone to listen to then." That day became known, and the rebalancing, the false quiet of the stillness industry cracked like thin glass, and the world remembered the real thing. It wasn't about purchase and peace. It was about earning it by stopping long enough to feel the ground breathe back. Years later, when Lark was grown, she returned to that valley often, not to lead but to tend. She refused titles, refused monuments. She said the rain didn't need another caretaker, just companions, and that how she lived humble, barefoot, patient. Every time she laughed, the clouds thickened somewhere nearby. Every time she cried, the lightning curved soft around her sorrow. The Grove knew her were one of its own, and when she passed, the tree didn't mourn her either. It bloomed. For the first time, silver leaves unfolded, dripping light instead of water. The sky cleared not in grief but in gratitude. The ledger had another name written in rain. Balance restored, debt settled. They say if you visit the Grove now, you won't find a tomb or a statue, just a silver word carved into the trunk of that silver tree, shimmering whenever the sun hits it right. Listen, and that all the Grove needed anyone to do, time it tends to do, carried on. Not with fanfare, not with fury, but with the same quiet stride the Grove had taught it centuries ago. The world that surrounded that sacred valley learned to breathe at its own pace again, and little by little patience slipped back into the bloodstream of humanity. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to matter. The rain had resumed its cycle, moving not by command or calculation, but by remembrance, and the memory it carried was a kind one, the faces of those who had listened long enough to change its path. The generations that followed Lark time didn't rebuild the Grove. They didn't wall it off or make it holy. They simply tended it. Families would walk the narrow paths barefoot, carrying food and stories instead of prayers. The children would play under the silver tree, not knowing their laughter echoed the same rhythm me, the old rain. There was no dogma he, only a way of being. The House of Slow Water still stood, though its walls had mostly fallen into vines. What remained was an open hall with no doors and no clocks. On calm nights, the wind passed through it like a hymn may have written for no one in particular. The few teachers who stayed behind didn't call themselves mentors anymore. They were reminders. They didn't teach how to wait. They taught how to trust waiting the difference, one old man would say, tapping his cane against the floor. If faith waiting with faith, it's torture waiting with faith. That rain. His students didn't write that down, they just nodded, feeling the weight of it settle deep. Every word spoken in that valley sounded it had been soaked in water before reaching your ears. You couldn't shout there, it was not allowed by nature itself. By now the world outside had moved on to things the ancients couldn't have imagined. Voices stored in light, memories printed in dust, cities that floated quiet in the high sky.
But even after, in the clouds men head home, folks still kept tiny bowls near their windows, filling them with condensation. They called it artificial rain, though the elders knew better. They said every drop that they had, even from machine air, still bowed to the same rhythm that ran through the grove. Rain couldn't forget itself, no matter how many circuits tried to imitate it. It was while that time that a story began to circle it. It started small, in the markets and message boards, then drifted through word of mouth. Someone had seen a new kind of storm. Not wild, not programmed, just awake. It didn't follow wind patterns, didn't obey pressure gradients. It moved like a traveler, wandering the world, stopping wherever the people had lost their patience. It lingered over broken nations, over crowded cities, over quiet villages that had forgotten how to sing. It rained not to punish, but to remind. And when it left, folks reported feeling lighter, as if their hearts had been cleaned of rust. They called it the walking storm. No one could prove it was real, but every account told the same thing. The sound of it was not thunder.
It was humming low and even at the heartbeat of the old cowboy himself. Some said if you stood under it long enough, you could see the outline of a man sitting cross-legged in the rain, head bowed, humming through eternity. Others said the sound came from the trees themselves, singing in language that weren't words but agreements. In those days, rain became currency again, but not the way it had been before. It wasn't traded in markets or bottled for profit. It was earned. Communities began keeping what they called patience ledgers. They tracked not debts or sales, but acts of restraint, kindness, and stillness. A farmer who left a field fallow for a season added to the ledger. A craftsman who repaired instead of replacing. A neighbor who waited before speaking harsh. Once the pages filled, they burned them bid offering not to gods, but to the idea that maybe waiting was the oldest investment of all. And more often than not, the rains would come soon after. One day a group of travelers came to the valley with an odd gift. A mirror made of clear stone, said to reflect not faces but truths. Vi är uppe i gjorde John of our first this time made you can the time spin with black and what a twir truths they can't seek it for rebirth and that's a sale but acts of restraint, kindness and stillness. A farmer who left a field fallow for a season added to the ledger. A craftsman who repaired instead of replacing. A neighbor who waited before speaking harsh. Once the pages filled, they burned them bid offering not to gods, but to the idea that maybe waiting was the oldest investment of all. And more often than not, the rains would come soon after. One day, a group of travelers came to the valley with an odd gift. A mirror made of clear stone, said to reflect not faces but truths. They placed it at the base of the silver tree and asked the grove to show them what it remembered. When the storm came that night, the mirror fogged and shimmered until shapes began to form within it. Faces of everyone who'd have walked this story. Mira, Eli, Corin, Elsie, Saul, Tobias, May, Lark, all standing in the same rain, eyes calm, looking not at the travelers, but through them. And behind them, but barely visible, the cowboy himself had tipped low, lips curved in that same quiet smile that started the whole thing. Then the mirror cracked, split right down the middle, and when the travelers looked in, they saw only themselves with all and changed. They took nothing from the grove that night except silence, which, truth be told, was all it had offered. After that, the valley was closed, not by walls or decree, but by the will of the rain itself. The paths grew wild again, the air thick with fog, and no map could find its mark. The grove didn't vanish, it just became invisible to the unready. You could walk right through it and never know. But for those who carried stillness in their hearts, the rain would part the mists, and the silver tree would reveal itself again, standing proud than the day it first grew. And so the story of the rain ledger didn't end, it balanced. The world would forget, then remember, then forget again. And each time it remembered, the rain would fall somewhere, steady and slow, as if to whisper to the soil and the souls alike. Patience ain't lost. It's waiting for you to notice it again. They say if you stand under that invisible rain long enough, the air starts to hum the old tune, and if you listen closely, you'll hear every name written in water. Then, when the hum fades and the world goes still, a single voice speaks soft, amused, timeless peace kept, debt settled. And that, friend, is how the story keeps breathing. The centuries that came after were quiet ones, at least how the historians describe them. They faded the long listening, though nobody remembered exactly who started the name. It was a time when the world finally ran out of new things to build and started remembering the value of what was already standing. The old monuments were left to fade under moss. The rivers ran free again. Whole cities were dismantled by choice. Their steel and glass turned into tools for rebuilding soil instead of skylines. It wasn't peace in the way poets like to paint it. It was work, slow and steady, the kind of effort that didn't make headlines but changed everything just the same. Rain was no longer a resource, it had become a measure. Nations recorded not how much fell, but how evenly it did. A place that learned to share the sky was a place that thrived. And the ledgers, Lord, those ledgers, had come back in a form that would have made the old cowboy grin. They weren't written in books anymore, but in behavior. Markets tallied how long people waited before taking, how many breaths they let between want and action. Prophet had learned patience again. But the grove, you could still wall it, that had grown into something else entirely. No longer a Mill Valley, no longer bound by geography, the rain had carried its rhythm to every corner of the earth. There were groves in deserts now, groves in oceans, groves in hearts. The old silver tree was just one root among millions. You could tell where the rhythm had taken hold by the sound of the thundersaw, deliberate, never rushing to strike. The storms had learned to breathe. There was a woman named Nara who lived during those years, though she never found herself important. She was a listener, same as the ones before her, though her classroom wasn't soil, it was signal. She worked in the wind farms off the coast, tending the great turbines that turned gales into power. To most folks, they were just machines. But to Nara, they were instruments. She swore she could hear melodies in their rotations, each one humming a different tone of the same old song. The rain talked, she used to tell her crew, the wind then carries the message. When she was young, she'd heard the legend of the grove from her grandmother, a bedtime story about coins and cowboys and storms that followed patience. Most kids grew out of such tales, but not Nara. Something about it stuck, deep and permanent. She started collecting stories the way South folks collect seashells. Any mention of old rain, old lessons, she wrote it down. Over time, her notebooks grew heavy with what she called the shared rhythm. Not scripture, not science, just evidence of memory. She said every person she met carried a fragment of the ledger in their voice, whether they knew it or not. One winter, while working a shift alone, she noted something wrong. The wind had stopped, not slowed, stopped. The turbine stood still, blades frozen in place, though the air around them trembling with invisible movement. And then she heard it, the hum, low, steady, unmistakable, the same tone her grandmother used to hum when storms lived. She stepped outside, letting the salt wind hit her face, and saw clouds rolling in from the horizon. Not dark clouds, silver. They pulsed like heartbeats. She knew then that it was not a malfunction, it was a visitation. The rain began to fall without warning, soft and even, spreading across the ocean in long ribbons of light. Nora dropped to her knees, laughing through tears. She'd read the story her whole life, but she'd never heard it like this. The storm was speaking, not in words, but in rhythm. It was telling her the same thing it had told Mira, Eli, Corin, Elsie, Saul, Tobias, May, and Lark before her. You're right on time. When it ended, she went back to her cabin, soaked to the bone and changed in ways she couldn't explain. She spent the next 10 years translating that rhythm into patterns of sound and light, turning rainfall into code. Her work spread across the world. Some called it music, others data, but Nora never cared much for labels. She said she was just listening out loud. Her recordings were played in hospitals, gardens, and factories, anywhere folks needed reminding of what stillness sounded like. They named the collection the Quiet Inheritance. When Nara died, her ashes were mixed with soil and rainwater and poured into the sea. For weeks afterward, sailors reported seeing thin columns of silver light rising from the waves at dawn. They faded sea rain, though no one could measure it. It came without clouds, fell without falling, and vanished when you blinked. But those who caught it on their skin said it left a feeling. Not wetness, not chill, but a kind of peace that hummed under their ribs for hours after. That was how the world learned that the grove hadn't stayed on land. It had followed the tide, spreading across the globe, finding new soil wherever the patient still walked. The rain ledger had gone fully circular, no start, no finish, just balance, self-sustaining, self-healing. The names of its caretakers were remembered not on paper, but in thunder. The cowboy hum still echoed through storms, slow and certain, a note that refused to fade. And maybe that was the final lesson all along, that rain was never a miracle, never a curse, never even weather. It was the sound of the universe settling its accounts, one drop at a time, every kindness paid in rainfall. every cruelty taxed by drought. A system so simple and fair, it didn't need enforcers, just listeners. And in the end, that what humanity had become in dead, not masters of their world, but partners in its rhythm. Even now, if you stand on a cliff and look toward the horizon during the first rain of spring, you can see it. A faint shimmer in the storm clouds, like a ledger still being written, each drop a signature, each rumble a seal. And somewhere deep in the thunder chest, that familiar voice drawls through eternity, calm, certain, amused. We're all just raindrops learning how to fall honest. There came a time when even the elders began to wonder if the rain would need to teach again. The world, it seemed, had found its rhythm for good. Crops rose and fell with no famine in between. Trade happened fair and slow, and even the arguments of nations were settled not in fire but in silence. It was a peace so wide and soft that Tup feared it might dissolve the edges of the human spirit. You see, people forget that balance ain't the absence of motion. It's the art of holding steady while the wind still blows. And sure enough, the wind was coming. It started small, as our reckonings do. There were whispers in the new market's talk of ways to accelerate patience. A contradiction plain in daylight, but clever men found a way to dress it in logic. They said humanity had mastered stillness so well that now it could be made efficient. Why wait a year for a crop to grow when algorithms could simulate the rhythm of rain and trick the seed into sprouting in a day? Why let wealth compound slow when synthetic storms could mimic the hum and multiply faster? They thought it temporal compression, a fancy name for hurrying without seeming to hurry. And the people bought it, they bought it in droves. After all, what harm was there in saving time? The first harvest came quicker than expected, the first profit stacked higher. But the world has always had a way of testing shortcuts that don't fail the exam. The new rain looked like rain, sounded like rain, but it carried no memory. It fell on soil that didn't know how to breathe, and plants grew hollow, beautiful, but tasteless. Even the silver tree's descendants of the grove heart began to fade at the edges, their bark cracking like old ledgers left too long in the sun. Then came the silence. Not the good kind, the heavy kind, the kind that sits in your chest like a missed apology. The windmills stopped humming, the sea lights vanished, and storms no longer spoke. The world had overdrawn on stillness, it had spent its balance on speed. For a while no one noted, the markets were still bright, the sky still blue, but something in the air felt thin, like the note of a song stretched too far. And in that silence, an old sound returned, the low hum of thunder, deep below the horizon, rolling toward a world that had forgotten how to wait for it. There was a man living by the coast then, a wanderer named Dalen. No one knew where he came from, only that he carried a rusted harmonica and a pocket watch that didn't tick. Folks said he'd been born under a storm, and that the rain never touched it twice. The same way he didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened, mostly 'cause the air around him seemed to lean in, like the world itself was taking notes. One day, as he watched the waves roll in silence, he pulled that harmonica to his lips and started playing. It wasn't music, not in the way we know it. It was more like the echo of a heartbeat, too patient to rush. Long, drawing notes that rose and fell like breathing. The air changed when he played. The clouds began to thicken, hesitant at first, like an old horse remembering the way home. The wind joined him, humming soft and low, carrying that sound inland. They say the first drop fell on a field of hollow wheat and turned it gold again. They say the second fell on a city that had forgotten its rivers, and water rolled from the stones. The third, it fell on the ruins of a silver tree, and from that cracking bark new leaves began to glimmer. Dalen didn't stop playing for 7 days and nights. When his lips bled, he played through the pain. When his breath faltered, the storm filled in the notes for him. The people called it the long rain, though unpreferred the restoring. And when it ended, Dalen was gone, no way, no body, but his harmonica hanging from the lowest branch of that reborn silver tree, humming every time the wind blew through. The rain that followed was not the same as before. It was slower, deeper, carrying a kind of weight that made even children quiet. It didn't fall everywhere at once anymore. It chose. It sought out those who waited, those who listened. A man who paused before taking another word for truth might find his garden blessed the next morning. A woman who forgave before speaking her anger might see dew where none should have formed. The rain had grown personal, selective, like it had finally learned who deserved it. The scholars tried to explain it, of course. They said it was humidity cycles, magnetic resonance, old tech residuum words that filled books but not hearts. The people of the land, though they understood, the ledger was alive again, not in stone or script, but in every choice made with or without patience. And maybe that was what Dalen had meant to do all along, to remind the world that time wasn't something you could save or stretch or store. It was something you could only steward. In the years after, they built no statues for him. They didn't need to. Every harmonica that played across the plains carried a bit of his song. Every lull in conversation before a kind word was spoken bore his name in silence. And if you stood in the rain long enough, you could swear you heard it. The faintest whistle ride in the wind, drawing the world back into rhythm. They say when the last silver leaf falls from the grove, if it dare or does, it won't be a sign of ending, but of arrival. Because maybe the truth of wealth, of patience, of all that been whispered through the centuries, ain't in what we build or keep, it in what we outlast. And the rain, well, it's been outlasting us since, boy, we learned to name it, that the beauty of balance don't need belief. It keeps account. After Dalen's storm had settled and the winds went quiet again, the world eased back into its hum, though it was softer now, like a man speaking low after remembering his manners. The soil had memory again, the rivers had a direction, and the skies, well, they'd gone back to being honest. You could tell because the rain didn't fall for everyone anymore. It fell for those who earned it. That wasn't punishment, that was rhythm. Patience had gone scarce again, and the rain was rationing its gift. The people learned fast. They stopped looking for shortcuts and started digging deeper, not into the ground, but into themselves. The young ones were raised on stories of the ledger, not the old cowboy or May or the grove, but of the idea itself. The creed was simple and carved into every schoolhouse door. Wait clean, work slow, spin truth. They called it the threefold balance, and for a long while, it was enough. You could see its print everywhere. In the way neighbors traded labor instead of credit. In how folks built barns with spare hands instead of hired ones. In how time stopped being something you owned and turned back into something you shared. The sound of hammer and rain had become one again. But man being man still found ways to wrestle with patience. There was a new breed of wanderer on the plains now, folks who chased storms not for shelter or worship, but for profit. They were horde sky traders. They'd learned how to bottle the et of rainfall, turning the vibration of each droplet into an energy pulse. They said it could power whole towns without needing wind or fire, and at first, it worked. Lights glowed brighter, harvest doubled, travel got faster, but each bottle drawn from the sky left the clouds a little thinner, the thunder a little hoarser. You could feel it, the air losing its patience again. There was one trader, though, who never sold what he caught, name of Jerron Vale. He was quiet, always reading alone, always listening to the horizon like it might whisper something worth remembering. They said he had a scar that ran from his ear down to his collarbone, shaped like a lightning bolt that decided to walk instead of strike. He never said where he got it, and no one dared ask twice. What they did know was that he carried no rifle, no coin, but a sachet full of glass jars that shimmered faint blue in moonlight. And while other traders sold storms to the cities, Jerron brought his to dry towns places forgotten by the new rain. He'd set a jar on the ground, twist the lid, and wait. The air would hum, the grass would stir, and sometimes, just sometimes, one honest drop would fall. He never charged, he never spoke. He just nodded once, tipped his hat, and rode on. The people started calling him the Rain Shepherd. Some thought he was a ghost, others swore he was Dalen reborn. Jerron didn't care for either story. He just kept moving one storm at a time. The sky traders hated him for it, said he was bad for business. They hunted him across deserts and valleys trying to steal his jars, but no one ain't caught him. See, Jerron didn't mean collect rain. He understood and knew how to talk to it. Some said he'd wait by a dead tree for 3 days, humming low until the air remembered how to breathe again. That's the thing about patience. It don't always look noble. Sometimes it looks like stillness mistaken for failure. But Geron was not waiting for glory or revenge. He was waiting for the rain to trust man again, and he knew that trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, the same way Dalen earned his storm, the same way May earned her grove. So he rode and waited and gave away what little he had until the day he rode into the dust frontier. The dust frontier wasn't a place so much as a punishment. The land had been dry for centuries, cracked open like an old tongue that forgot how to pray. No birds, no crops, no humming. Just wind sharp enough to skin a man will. The sky trader said no storm would cross it. Not even a man's shadow lingered long. But Geron rode in anyway, hat low, jars rattling against his saddle. Reached the center on the third night, under a moon so pale it looked tired of its own light. There he found what he'd been looking for, a skeleton of a silver tree, twisted and bone white. Its bark had long since flaked to dust, but its roots still ran deep. Geron dismounted, placed his last jar at the base, and knelt. "You've waited longer than any of us," he whispered. "Time to rest." He twisted the jar open, but no rain came, no thunder, just silence, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. So Geron did the only thing he knew how. He began to hum. The same low, uneven tune Dalen once played. The wind carried it, weak at first, then strong. The clouds began to gather, not from the sky, but from the ground, from dust rising, remembering it had once been clay, once been life. And when the first drop finally fell, it didn't stop. For 10 days the rain washed through the dust frontier. Not wild, not violent, steady, each drop carried a piece of memory. And when the storm cleared, the silver tree was standing again, alive, gleaming, roots humming like an old song found again. Jaron was gone, of course. They never found his body, but his horse wandered back to the nearest town, dripping wet, with his satchel empty. The next season, farmers found puddles that whispered when you leaned close. Merchants found their scales humming before dawn, and travelers swear that if you ride far enough west, where the air smells like memory and the thunder sounds like breath, you'll find the dust frontier blooming green, and in the middle of it, that silver tree, still glimmering, still humming, with a siln jar hanging from its lowest branch, fogged and half full. No one touches it, no one dares. They just listen, 'cause maybe, just maybe, that's all the rain asked us to do. As the years unfurled from that storm, the world started speaking slow again. The dust frontier, once a scar on the map, had turned into something miraculous. Grass rolled across the plains like green tidewater, and every now and then, if you were lucky enough to be riding through at dawn, you'd catch sight of silver mist drifting off the ground, humming the faintest note of contentment. Folks called it the rain breath. Said it was the land exhaling after holding its sorrow too long. Settlers began to move in, though they didn't build towns right away. They came not to conquer, but to listen. The soil was soft, the wind had memory. It told stories of the ones who'd waited before. And so these new settlers learned patience like religion. They built what they thought listening huts, tiny round cabins with open ceilings so the rain could fall straight through. There they'd sit in silence and study the rhythm of the drops, counting not in seconds but in heartbeats. That was their measure of wealth now, how long they could sit without interrupting the rain. And wouldn't you know it, trade found its way even into that stillness. People began offering rain shares, not stock or currency, but time. If one farmer couldn't sit his hour in silence cause of illness or labor, another would volunteer to take his place, listening on his behalf. When the rain fell on both farms, it was proof that patience could be shared and multiplied, just like coin, only cleaner. It was, in its quiet way, the world's first stillness economy. Of course, not everyone believed in it. The city still ran fast, slick with neon storms that never smelled like earth. They said the frontier peace was nostalgia dressed as virtue, but when their tech towers began humming wrong, when the sky above them turned the color of burnt silver and the air went dry, no matter how many machines they built to simulate moisture, they started sending folks west, scientists, priests, even poets, all walking into the frontier to study that impossible grove of patience. Some came back with journals full of theories, some never came back at all. The few who did return spoke softly, eyes distant, that if they'd heard a truth too simple to explain. The rain ain't water, one said. It's forgiveness that learned how to fall, The silver tree at the center of it, it had grown colossal by then. Its trunk glowed faintly even at night, and its roots spread like veins through the soil, touching every hut, every farm, every puddle that hummed. When lightning struck it once, instead of burning, it sang, a deep chord that rolled across the horizon like a bell tolling for the impatient. After that, the settlers built no fences, no borders. They said the grove hum was the protection they needed. One day, a boy named Thalen was born there under one of those storms. He came into the world silent, didn't cry, didn't breathe for near a minute until a drop of rain fell right on his chest. Then he gasped, blinked once, and smiled like he just remembered an old joke. From the start, he seemed different. He could sense when the rain was coming even below the clouds. He'd run outside barefoot, paint to the horizon, and whisper, "It listening." The elders said the ledger had marked him early. They made him the keeper of the quiet. Thalen grew up in that rhythm, speaking little but hearing everything. He learned from the old listeners, from the wind, from the hum of the tree. He wrote not with ink but with water, pouring droplets onto smooth stone to draw patterns that disappeared in seconds. They weren't words exactly, more like reminders. One of his stones read, "To rush is to distrust the rain." Another, "A man's wealth is counted in the silences he can bear." By the time he was grown, the frontier had turned into a vast nation of listeners. They didn't call themselves a people, they had themselves a pause. Their symbol was a silsnackle carved in the stone, always half fallen. They have eaten for the right moment to land. Travelers from other lands would come seeking wisdom, often leaving frustrated cause Thalen refused to speak. He'd sit by the silver tree, eyes closed, letting the rain fall over him till the visitor impatience broke it fever. Only then would he open his eyes and say, "Now we can start talking." It wasn't a performance. It was the last lesson the world needed, that knowledge couldn't be bought, only waited for. At our crawl, truths had spread without permission. The pause reached the cities, seeped into commerce, into politics, even into the hearts of those who'd forgotten how to stand still. Wait before you build, they'd say. Listen before you speak. And it worked because rain always honors its own. But as peace settled deep, Thalen began to notice something new. The hum of the silver tree was changing. It wasn't weaker, it was shifting. The tone had grown lower, heavier, like the world was preparing to sleep. One night he pressed his ear to the trunk and heard words rolling through it, slow thunder speaking in dreams, balance kept, lesson learned, time to pass the ledger forward. The next morning he left the listeners and told them it was time to move on. "We've waited long enough," he said, voice calm and mist. "The rain remembers us now. We don't need to stay put, to be patient." And with that, the people of the pause looked down their huts, packed their stones, and set off across the world again. Not to conquer, but to teach. Wherever they walked, rain followed. Not a flood, but to whisper. And wherever they left, silence remained, rich as soil. They say Thalen stayed behind, sitting under that silver tree, humming the tune of the first storm. When the next dawn came, the tree was gone, vanished without scorch or stump. In its place stood a puddle clear of glass, and in that puddle, if you looked long enough, you'd see not your reflection, but every drop you'd have wasted. And when you turned away, it rained. The puddle that replaced the silver tree never dried, not once, not even under the meanest summer sun. It sat there in the middle of the frontier, still glass, and the air around it always carried that faint hum like the last note of a song that didn't want to end. The travelers who passed through laid it the mirror rain. Some said it wasn't water at it, but memory made visible, holding every storm that had been fallen, every lesson the world had learned the hard way. It didn't ripple unless you looked too long, and when it did, you'd see things you weren't expecting. Moments of your life where you'd rushed or hurt or spent what wasn't ready to be spent. Folks left it alone after that, the wise ones anyway, but not everyone was wise. A few came hungry for what they thought was hidden inside that stillness. They wanted power, to bottle it, to own it, to name it. They thought machines, sensors, drills, all the same things that had once broken the sky. The mirror rain didn't fight him, it just watched. One by one, their tools failed, not from rust or heat, but from forgetting how to move. Their gears would slow, their lights dim, until even their shadows stopped falling right. The men themselves walked away days later, older somehow, their eyes hollowed from seeing too much of themselves in that impossible glass. The last one left a note carved in the dirt. The rain don't keep secrets, it keeps receipts. And so the frontier was left in peace again, tended only by wind and memory. The listeners had long since spread across the world, teaching patience to those who needed it most. They built no cities, no temples, just quiet spaces where the air could remember itself. In those places, the hum could be heard again, not to storm or thunder, but at a steady pulse beneath the skin of things. Some caught it the ledger echo. It was said that if you pressed your palm to the earth in silence long enough, you'd feel it answer back, soft, steady, alive. There was the old woman named Ida who found her way to the frontier in her final years. She wasn't a listener by trade, though she'd spent her life teaching numbers to the impatient accountant trade, the kind of arithmetic that makes or breaks men. But when her eyes grew dim and her hands too shaky to hold a pen, she started hearing the hum in her dreams. It called her by name. Ada, it whispered, come, sell your books. She packed what little she had and followed the sound until she reached that mirror of rain. She sat beside it for 3 days and 3 nights, without moving, her old bones cracking like firewood, her breath steady in prayer. On the morning of the 4th, the surface of the puddle rippled. She looked in, not afraid, and saw not her reflection, but 1,000 ledgers floating inside the water, each page filled with her life balances. Every debt she'd carried, every kindness she'd forgotten, every delay she'd mistaken for failure. Right there at the bottom of all that arithmetic, one min line glowed brighter than the rest. Interest paid in patience. She laughed. A dry cracked sound that startled the birds and said, so that how it works then. She dipped her hand into the puddle, and instead of feeling water, she felt warmth, like sunlight hiding under the surface. Her eyes closed, her breath slowed, and when the wind shifted, she was gone. Only her shawl remained, laid neatly by the edge dry beer dust. The rain that came that night was soft but endless. Folks said it was a world itself settling Ida final balance. That storm carried far past the frontier, past the mountains, all the way to the cities that have forgotten stillness. It soaked streets and skylines alike, and for the first time in generations, the people there stopped running. They just stood and listened, their reflections stretching across the puddled ground. Some cried, some laughed, some just stood silent, realizing they'd been thirsty in ways they couldn't name. The rain didn't scold them, it just fell steady, honest, and kind. When it cleared, a new phrase began spreading among the people, carved into walls, whispered between merchants, even printed on the back of their coins. The patient inherit the rain. It wasn't scripture, it was truth, born of long waiting. Those who lived by it prospered, not in gold or speed, but in time. Their businesses lasted longer, their families argued less, their crops didn't needed much water cause the soil itself had learned to breathe again. The impatient called it superstition. The wise just smiled. Some say that one night, years later, a traveler reading west under a half moon saw a faint figure sitting by that puddle, the outline of a man with a hat pulled low, humming an old tune into the stillness. He said the man looked like smoke, like rain trying to take shape. You waiting for someone? The traveler asked. The figure chuckled low, voice rough gravel. Always in wait, it said. But nothing rushes the rain, son. Not even me. By the time the traveler blinked, the figure was gone. But the hum stayed deep and rolling, following him all the way home. And when he told his kin what he'd heard, they just nodded. Sounds like the ledger's still open, they said. And we're all still writing now. They say every man, woman, and child carries a bit of that rain inside in a small, invisible ledger that hums when they act with patience and grows quiet when they don't. Some ignore it, some chase it, but those who learn to listen find themselves sleeping easy under storms because they know the balance always keeps itself. They don't pray for rain anymore, they just wait honest. And in the end, that's what the old cowboy wanted all along. Not worship, not legend, just a world that learned how to breathe with him. One hum, one drop, one heartbeat at a time, somewhere beyond the frontier, where the plains gave way to low, gay hills, and the smell of salt began to thicken the air. The rain carried its hum toward the sea again. It drifted like a song looking for a place to rest. Fishermen out on their quiet boats would hear it roll across the water, low and soft, a sound that wasn't quite thunder and wasn't quite wind. They'd take off their hats, bow their heads, and let the waves rock slow until the hum faded. None of them could tell you why they did it. It was just good manners, same as thinking a river before you cross. In time, those coastal folks started saying the sea itself had joined the ledger. They held the tides the ocean breathing. When the water swelled, it meant the world was remembering abundance. When they drew back, it meant she was holding back to keep her balance. Every rise, every fall, a transaction paid in patience. And those who fished by that rhythm never went hungry. They cast their nets when the hum rose and rested when it stilled. Their catches fed whole towns. No man argued with the sea anymore. They'd learned that the fastest way to drown was to rush her, but every piece, even the patient kind, carries a test in its shadow. There came a season when the hum went quiet. Not gone, but distant, the thunder hiding behind the horizon. The sky stayed gave for months, but not a drop fell. Crops withered, rivers thinned, and the ledger folk began to whisper of imbalance. Maybe we waited too long, they said. Maybe patience has forgotten us. The elders kept still listening, but even their calm began to crack at the edges. Then one night, a boy named Jory, barely 12, thin as a reed, snuck out to the cliffs. His family fields had dried to dust, and he couldn't stand watching his father knead in prayer to a sky that refused to answer. So he did the only thing he knew. He began to hum. Soft at first, tuneless, just a child guess at an old melody, but the sea heard it. Where he stood in the water, stirring his hair, and somewhere deep beneath the waves something answered. The hum came back. Not loud, not grand, but true. And when it did, a single drop of rain fell on his cheek, then another, then thousands. By dawn, the storm had come home. Not wild, but grateful. It rained for 3 days, slow and sure, and the elders said later that the hum in that storm was different. It had the rhythm of laughter in it, playful, young. The ledger, it seemed, had a new entry, curiosity credited. They built a shrine on that cliff, not to worship, but to remember. And they carved one line into the stone: when patience grows too quiet, curiosity wakes her. That say spread far and wide. Teachers used it, merchants quoted it, and parents whispered it to restless children. It became the twin to the old creed: patience and curiosity, balance and motion. The world needed dope. Same eight lungs need breath in and out. Years passed, and Jory grew into a man who refused titles. He called himself a wanderer of rhythms. Some said he could sense the hum of imbalance miles away. He'd show up in town's gentle droughts, stand in their squares, and start humming until the clouds remembered their duty. He didn't ask for coin or thanks, though folks gave both. He'd smile, tip his head toward the sky, and say, "I'm just reminding the rain what she already knows." Under his quiet watch, the world grew steadier. The stillness economy became the harmony age. Trade moved dike seasons again, slow enough to heal, fast enough to live. Even the old cities softened. Concrete gave way to gardens, glass towers opened their roofs to the rain. The air began to hum again, everywhere, in every corner. For the first time in centuries, no man feared the storm. They welcomed it like kin. Then, one morning, when Jory was an old man sitting by the safe sea he'd called the rain from, a boy, he heard a sound he hadn't in decades: silence. The hum was gone, not distant, not faint gone. He waited all day, watching the waves move without song, and when night came, he saw something shimmering on the horizon. A line of light stretching across the water, straight at a ledger stroke. Hilts once, twice, then began moving toward shore. When it reached him, he saw what it was: rain, walking on the sea. Each droplet hung in the air, shimmering like it was thinking about where to fall. They led round him, a slow spiral of silver lay, humming the faintest note he'd heard. It wasn't the cowboy hum, nor Dalen, nor Thalen. It was Nugent and Fuller, the next generation hum. He smiled, closed his eyes, and said, "You're early." The droplets hung there, then drifted forward, touching his hands, his hair, his face, and when they did, he turned to mist soft and blue and content. The storm carried him inland, scattering him across the hills, the rivers, the forests. The hum came back that night, stronger than Ned, rolling through every grain of soil. But now it wasn't just one note. It was millions, layered and alive. The world itself had learned to sing. That's how the elders say the ledger finally closed. Not with silence, but with chorus. Not with debt, but with union. Every drop, every hum, every breath, from cowboy to listener to rain itself, all accounted, all balanced. And yet, even then, no one wrote the end. Because endings like storms ain't real. They're just pauses long enough for us to notice the rhythm before it starts a guess. They say if you stand by that sea at dusk and hum Jory tune, The tidal rise jizz enough to touch your boots. If the well were leaning in to listen, and if you whisper anything worth keeping, the rain'll take it, carry it inland, fold it into the next ledger, the next life, the next long woad, in somewhere, out beyond sound and time. It old cowboy chuckles low and says, "That good, let it rain."